Thank you, Tom. As the nation wakes up on this historic day to an almost certain vote to leave the EU, we'll have the latest on the political and economic consequences.
There are calls for David Cameron to resign, so can he survive as Prime Minister? This is Good Morning Britain. EU referendum, the result.
Good morning, Britain. On a day the country has chosen a new course.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Britain has voted to leave the EU after one of the closest fought political battles in British history.
Tories bid to save day. Boris Johnson leads more than 80 pro-Brexit Conservatives, signing a letter to the Prime Minister asking him to remain in office amid growing pressure for him to resign.
The value of the pound has nosedived against the dollar, hitting a 31-year low as markets react.
And as Scotland and Northern Ireland vote to remain, questions are raised over the future of the Union.
Friday, 24th of June, 2016, EU referendum, the result. Live from ITV Studios, this is Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid.
It's just gone 6 o'clock. Welcome to a Good Morning Britain special on a very historic day as we bring you the latest on the referendum result, the political reactions and what it will mean for you.
It's now almost certain the UK has voted to leave the European Union. Votes are still coming in. Leave are in the lead by about 3%. The official announcement from the Electoral Commission is expected later this morning. We will bring it to you live. During a night balanced on a knife edge, there were falls in the pound as the markets reacted to the news.
After a disastrous result for the Remain campaign, David Cameron now faces a very uncertain future. Gargi Patel has more.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Jubilation, chanting and delight as Nigel Farage declared victory in what has been a bruising war over Europe.
82,000.
Early on, there were gasps of surprise in Sunderland, followed by loud cheers as Brexiters scored a 20-point lead. A very different mood at Remain headquarters, realising they'd misjudged the mood of the country. When the polls closed, the markets were confident of a Remain win. The pound surged, but then fell dramatically as a series of early results put the Leave camp ahead.
The implications are very, very major, both economic and political. I mean, economic, we probably will have a bloodbath in the financial markets.
For much of the night, the result was right down to the wire. Just after 3 a.m, votes hovered over the 50-50 mark. But it became clear that Leave's support was much bigger than expected, heading for a historic decision for Britain to leave the EU. Former SNP leader Alex Salmond says it could now trigger a second Scottish referendum for independence.
We've got a united country in Scotland who wants to be part of Europe. And in the manifesto it said if Scotland was dragged out of Europe against the will of the Scottish people, then the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another independence referendum.
David Cameron is now facing his own dilemma. Is he in or out of Downing Street?
Let's get somebody in number 10 who will carry out the will and the wishes of the British people. Maybe leave it till 10 o'clock till he resigns, something like that.
In a bid for unity, almost 90 Tory MPs who supported leaving the EU signed an open letter urging the PM to stay on, whatever the result.
The one thing we do not need to do if we have voted to leave the European Union tonight is for the Prime Minister to go and for us to be plunged into a Conservative leadership contest.
But after months of arguments, now come months, maybe years of negotiations over the country's future. Gargi Patel, Good Morning Britain.
Well, we now have some breaking news. In the last few moments, we can confirm that the Leave campaign has crossed the line and now has enough votes to win the EU referendum.
Our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp, is in Downing Street this morning. Morning to you, Chris. Well, this is a historic moment.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, to put it mildly, this was not the results that David Cameron was expecting when the polls closed at 10 o'clock last night. But here we are, 8 hours later, 6 o'clock this morning, and we're about to enter the worlds that David Cameron urged us all not to enter. We have turbulence in the markets, the pound is on the slide, there are question marks about his future as Prime Minister, question marks too about the United Kingdom as well. So much could be decided here today. We are expecting, although it's not confirmed, David Cameron to appear in the street here, perhaps within the next hour. He's got to make some sort of announcement. He's got to tell us what's been agreed between Downing Street, the Treasury and the Governor of the Bank of England in order to stop further turmoil in the markets. He may also address question marks over his own future. Last night, 85 Tory MPs who were campaigning to leave the United Kingdom signed a letter saying that they think, whatever the result, that David Cameron should remain as Prime Minister. Significantly, however, there were 50 or so MPs who were not on that letter. Among them, the former Cabinet Minister Ian Duncan Smith, the former Environment Secretary Owen Paterson, senior figures in this party who did not put their signatures to that letter. Also, we've had conversations overnight from Scotland. The First Minister of Scotland, and Nicola Sturgeon, and the former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, have been addressing the fact that Scotland voted to remain whilst England and Wales have voted to leave. And at 4:30 this morning, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon issued a statement saying the vote here makes it clear the people of Scotland see their future as part of the European Union. Well, clearly, voters in England and Wales do not see their future as part of the European Union, and there are huge implications after that vote announced in the early hours of this morning.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, the fact of the matter is it was the Prime Minister who called the referendum. It was the Prime Minister who was at the head of that campaign to remain. He's lost that campaign. There will be many people listening to you this morning who think, you know, he probably should be going immediately. But could that be something that adds to more turmoil?
Well, interestingly, during the course of this campaign, there was a sort of slight change of mood from Tory MPs who'd previously said there's no way that David Cameron can stay on as leader if he loses this referendum, which he now has. Now, they changed that in the middle of the campaign and said, actually, we don't want to present to the British people some sort of edge-of-the-cliff scenario. So if you vote to leave, there'll be turmoil, the Prime Minister will go, there'll be a leadership election in the Tory party. However, what happened after that was it got, let's say, a lot more acrimonious between the Remain and Leave sides. The blue-on-blue fights got worse and worse, and a lot of those MPs now think there's no way that David Cameron can stay. He may well address that here in the next few minutes, we don't know, but there are a significant number in his party now who believe that the future is not with David Cameron.
OK, Chris Shipp, thank you very much indeed. Also, we'll be back to you with any news as we get it. David Cameron expected to come out in front of that famous door and make a statement shortly. To confirm the breaking news in the last few moments, we can confirm now the Leave campaign has crossed the line and now has enough votes to win the EU referendum.
Yeah, so on Good Morning Britain, the EU referendum, the results. We're live in Manchester this morning where the official announcement on Britain leaving the EU will be made, and we will bring you that as it happens live on air.
Now a divided nation, Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain, while England and Wales voted to leave. Can our union now be saved?
Well, lives will be turned upside down. What will happen to the 2 million British expats who live and work in Europe?
Well, what indeed? It's the morning after the night before in lots of ways here. The beach cleaners are out, they're sweeping up, and they're trying to make sense here of what seems an extraordinary decision. Nobody believed it. People are waking up genuinely scared, genuinely angry and very confused. Have they effectively been made illegal migrants overnight? What will it mean for the thousands of businesses that rely on the 60 million British tourists that come here? And is this, and this is a very real fear, the start of a Eurosceptic surge that will now sweep right across the continent? We're going to be talking to experts and ordinary people about a new dawn for Europe.
Kate, thanks very much indeed. David Cameron's former communications director, Andy Coulson, is in the studio for us this morning. Lots of people, saying it's just a matter of when the Prime Minister goes. So when do you think that might be?
It's very hard to say. Only he knows. And that's really is the sort of truth of the situation right now, is that it's for one of those situations where really only David Cameron can decide. I think he'll be surrounded by a lot of people, and I think all of them, I suspect all of them, possible exception of Sam, who will know him better than anybody, of course, will be saying, please stay. Because the one thing we're sure of, as a result of this decision, is that there's going to be political chaos.
Andy, you've been with David Cameron when he first got elected. You've been there for that big moment, which was probably the best moment of his life. This is now probably the worst moment of his career. Not the worst of his life. He's had far more serious things happen to him. But you know the man. You know what he's like. Is there a moment in all this when David Cameron, having put it all on red and it's come up black, falls on his sword and says, I lost, that's it, I'm out?
I hope not, because I don't think it's what the country needs. And there's going to be a kind of head and heart thing going on. You know, the head, I suspect, is telling him, well, actually, you know, you were elected to lead the country. You've got a mandate. You should get on with the job. But the heart may well be telling him, you know, I'm not sure I can do this. I'm not sure I want to do this. Well, that's a terribly difficult, you know, situation to find yourself in.
But it's a crushing defeat, isn't it? And when that happens in political life,
it's a defeat. You know, I mean,
but he called it. He didn't have to call it, did he? He called the referendum. It's his idea. He didn't have to do it. And now the British public have basically said, we do not agree with you, Prime Minister. Well, I mean, it's like a mini general election on him, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. Is it a vote on him or is it a vote on the issue? Very difficult to work that out right now.
Well, as the Prime Minister who was arguing so strongly for a campaign which has just lost, it looks like a vote of no confidence.
Sure. Listen, I'm not pretending it's anything other than a very bad, disastrous evening for him, for the Conservative Party. It's also, by the way, a disastrous evening for the Labour Party.
Right.
Who have now, I think, become completely disconnected from their core vote. And so in that situation where, you know, our two main parties are in a state of flux, let's put it politely, what we don't need, you know, in my view, and I suspect in the view of those who are around David Cameron right now, is a Conservative leadership election, which, by the way, is not a straightforward, swift process. It's actually a pretty complicated, pretty long process.
You know how that works. There's word already today that Michael Gove and Boris Johnson already discussing with David Cameron the terms of his departure. If that is true, one of those two men is likely to become the next Tory leader and therefore Prime Minister. But how does that process work?
Well, look, if it's rebellion and it's forced, then the process is 50 signatures, and then that prompts the ballot. And then from the ballot, you know, there's a very straightforward a majority decision. This isn't going to be a rebellion. If it happens, this will be a decision made by David Cameron.
And final question, betting man, if it was Gove or Boris, who do you think will end up leader?
Right now, I don't know. I think there's a real problem with Boris. You know, there are an awful lot of pro-Brexit Tory MPs who do not want to see Boris as Prime Minister.
So it could be Gove? Could be somebody else?
It could be Gove. It could be somebody else.
Andy, stay with us. Fascinating insight from a guy who, of course, has been right behind that number 10 door with David Cameron for years, knows the man, knows how he ticks. Massive moment now for our Prime Minister.
Yeah, massive moment for the financial markets. Our business editor, Joel Hills, is in the city. What's happened to the pound, Joel, and what does it mean?
Well, this morning, it sunk like a stone. The markets last night were not expecting this result. And the second it became clear that there was a very strong chance that Britain was going to vote to leave the European Union, this is what happened. The pound went into not free fall, but it crashed. It's currently down 9.5% against the dollar. If we look over at the stock markets, not yet open, will open in the next couple of hours. They're expecting on the London Stock Exchange, the FTSE 100 to close down by about 8%. The last time the pound was this low, Margaret Thatcher was in power. The last time I saw a fall of that magnitude on the London Stock Exchange, it was just after Lehman's in the financial crisis. Now, we're not there. We're not in that territory. Our banks are robust, we're told. The Bank of England, though, will be looking at this very, very carefully. Any sign of panic, and we're not there yet, and I'm sure it will be intervening.
Joel, thanks very much indeed. Just coming up to 6:15, let's get an update on the latest referendum headlines. Here's Charlotte.
Thanks very much. And there is, of course, only one big headline this morning on Good Morning Britain. The Leave campaign has crossed the line and now has enough votes to win after one of the hardest fought political battles in British history. During a night balanced on a knife edge, the pound hit a 31-year low as markets reacted to the news. After a disastrous result for the Remain campaign, David Cameron now faces an uncertain future, with Nigel Farage leading calls for him to resign.
Well, after 25 years campaigning to leave Europe, the UKIP leader Nigel Farage has been vindicated, and he will join us live this morning.
Can we just have a moment? Wow. Wow.
It's, depending on how you voted, this morning is either Independence Day or Armageddon.
Either way, it's a wow. And let's get the news travelling where you are, and then come back for all the breaking news on an historic day for our country.
We'll see you in just a moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Hello, I'm Amanda Piper. We're your EU referendum results here in the Meridian region. And from the very beginning, as the results started to come in, the Leave campaign was well ahead. Weymouth and Portland, which has a big fishing community, voting 61% to go. And in Havant, more than 62% of people wanting out of the European Union. The Isle of Wight, Rushmore, South Bucks and many more contributing to the overall national picture, which pushed the Lead campaign out in front. And Portsmouth, Chichester and Southampton also voting to go. In the Thames Valley, there were more Remain votes than in any other areas. More than 2/3 of voters in Oxford wanted us to stay in the EU. In Reading, it was 58%. And in Sussex, Lewis and Horsham voted Remain. Well, the result in Oxford was delayed because a councillor was ejected from the count because they clashed with security staff who refused him entry. In Witney, the West Oxfordshire count saw a majority of people vote to Remain, nearly 54% there, and a large turnout also, nearly 80%.
It's fantastic, you know, it's a good, clear majority. It shows that West Oxfordshire backed the local MP, and I'm delighted with the result.
Well, of course, you'll find all the results on our website. Well, now time for the weather.
Happiness come rain or shine. The Happy Egg Company happily sponsors ITV's Good Morning Britain local weather.
Hello there, very good morning to you. Well, what a difference a day makes. Today, much more cheerful out there from the off. Some decent sunny spells throughout this morning, even into the afternoon. Temperatures rising pretty quickly. Highs of 19 or 20 degrees, just a little fresher than yesterday. And a fair few showers furthest west, but certainly nothing like the downpours of yesterday. Bye for now.
Well, I'll have more for you in an hour's time. Now, though, it's back to Piers and Susanna in London.
Well, if you just joined us, it is a wow moment, isn't it?
It's
My goodness me.
Never known an election like this with the consequences that entail. Because this isn't just a general election where another party comes in and people think, oh, well, just sort of continue along in its merry way. This is an absolutely historic moment.
And it's so unpredictable.
UK.
When I went to bed last night at about 10ish, and Nigel Farage was first out to say, I think Remain have won. So he was almost conceding. I woke up this morning at about 3:45 to hear Nigel Farage claiming glorious victory. That is how unpredictable this has been.
And he's describing it as Independence Day.
Yeah, well, it is.
For the UK, that's what people have voted for.
But is that going to be a good or bad thing? We will find out, of course. Britain's decision to leave the EU is causing massive ripples across the globe. Let's cross now to Washington, where Robert Moore is there. Robert Moore, Donald Trump is flying into Scotland as we speak for a short stay here. He, of course, supported the idea of Brexit. I suppose, first question, how might this impact on his campaign in America?
Well, it's an outstanding point you make, Piers, because, of course, here in the United States, what have we had? We've had a kind of anti-establishment populist revolution seen in the votes for Donald Trump, but also for Bernie Sanders. Now it appears that kind of desire to kick the establishment has crossed the Atlantic. There's no doubt at all that I think Washington is going to wake up in a few hours' time pretty distressed at what has happened, because Britain was always seen as a powerful kind of pro-US voice inside the Brussels machinery. But specifically on how Donald Trump handles that, I think he'll see that as a kind of a vindication that Britain, like America, is kicking back at the establishment and defying conventions and all the conventional wisdom of kind of established politicians. So I think he'll say what's happened in America is now happening in Britain. He'll regard that as oxygen, I think, for his own political campaign.
And Robert, let me ask you this. President Obama, when he came over recently, made it very clear that should we Brexit, then Britain would be at the back of the queue, as he put it, for a new trade deal with America. Well, that is now a reality. We do need a new trade deal with America on our own. Is that likely to be the case now it's happened, that we would literally be at the back of America's queue?
Well, look, I think this is very problematic from a kind of the position of kind of American policymakers and decision makers. You know, this city, as you know, Piers, so well, is all about power and influence. And I think undoubtedly at the State Department, at the White House, at the Pentagon, they will regard this Brexit decision as diminishing Britain's influence in Europe and around the world. So the question really becomes, when there's the next big international crisis, does the president phone London first, or does he or she potentially in the future phone Berlin? So I think that this is a big deal for the political relationship between Washington and London. Look, clearly there's sort of cultural ties, the business links, the academic links between the two countries, all of that stays intact. But I think politically and strategically this morning, this is a really big deal. And I think American officials are going to recalibrate the whole relationship with London.
Robert Moore in Washington, thank you very much indeed. Obviously, so many repercussions here, but it's sort of ironic that Donald Trump is literally flying into Scotland right now, be holding a press conference this morning.
Well, Scotland, which overwhelmingly voted to remain, of course.
Right, but many people see Donald Trump as the American version of Nigel Farage, playing a kind of hardline populist campaign based on immigration, on terrorism and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, there's parallels, definitely.
Yeah, you have to think that this is part of a wider thing now in the country. John Redwood, who's just joined us, shaking his head vehemently through some of that report from Robert Moore, so we'll get your reaction to what was being said there.
Let's get some EU reaction. Crossing now to Brussels, the heart of the EU, and we're joined from there by Spanish member of the European Parliament, Enrique Guerrero. Well, what do you make of the UK leaving the EU?
Well, for us, it's very sad news, an unexpected one. And we have to respect, in any case, the decision of the British people. It has been a clear result, even a tight result. And for us, we have been defending the continuity of the United Kingdom inside of the European Union. We think that UK is stronger, would be stronger in the European Union, and the European Union would be stronger with UK. But finally, this is a decision that has been taken by the British people. I think that we face difficult times in the United Kingdom and in Europe. In the United Kingdom, because the country appears to be divided by territories, by generations, by expectations. The things are not going to be very easy reconstructed. And for European Union also, we have to think what we can do without the United Kingdom. Well, we have a clear prospect that we have to be united and give one step forward to more integration in order to tackle with the real challenges that we have: migration, security, finance, growth, jobs, prospects for young generation. And we will do it as European Union, and I think that we will have, in any case, UK as a partner for this prospect.
All right, Enrique Guerrero, who is a Spanish member of the European Parliament, thanks very much indeed. Well, John Redwood is here, of course, Conservative MP, Leave campaigner. A very good morning for you, and for those people who voted for Remain, can you explain why it is a good morning for them as well?
Well, it's a wonderful day for British democracy, and we all respect the will of the people, and the people have spoken. They want to take back control and make sure that the people who make the laws and impose the taxes are answerable directly to them through the United Kingdom Parliament, something I and many others have campaigned for long and hard. But I'd like to reassure everybody, first of all, anybody who's living here, has come here legally to work from the European continent, you're very welcome to stay. Nothing is going to change. They're as much welcome today as they were the day before. To the markets, I would say, calm down. There's no great economic significance. The trade isn't going to stop. They're still going to be selling us BMWs today just as they did yesterday. So the markets are really rather overreacting.
Well, they may be overreacting, Mr. Redwood, but it is the biggest collapse in the pound that we've ever seen. Let's bring in now Nigel Farage. We'll come to that element in a moment.
Good morning.
First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
That is the right thing to say to you. You've waged a very successful campaign. The country has been got back, which is what you wanted. The question I'm picking up on Twitter now is, now we've got it, what do we do with it?
Make sure we have a Prime Minister and a government that carry out the wishes of 17 million people. And now, whether that's Mr Cameron or not, I'm not so sure. My feeling is the Prime Minister could have risen above the fray. He chose not to. I think he probably has to go. I think we have to have a Brexit Prime Minister. We have to enter into a renegotiated relationship with the European Union, but simultaneously, let's start talking to the rest of the world. One of the things that John and I agree on 100% is there's a big world. 80% of the world's economy is not inside the European Union. So the opportunities here for us as a global trader are fantastic.
You looked a bit emotional earlier. Because I went to bed hearing you saying, I think Remain have won. I woke up hearing you jubilant. I was on the car, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, that's the same Nigel Farage. Well, and you were emotional there. That moment when you realised, well, I think we've got to commit. Let's watch the clip. This is you all emotional. A tearful Farage.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
The actual tear, there we are. Now, just putting aside all the politics here, on a human level, that moment for you, a very special moment.
I mean, 25 years I've campaigned for this. I fought my first by-election in 1994, and I just beat Lord Such by 164 votes, and it was considered pretty fringy and frankly pretty extreme to think we should be outside the European Union. And today there are 17 million people that have voted for it, and when I made those comments as the polls closed, I almost didn't dare to dream that it could happen, but it has. And it's a fantastic day, and it's a victory, not for me or for John, it's a victory for ordinary, decent people who've taken on the establishment and they've won today.
But there are a lot of ordinary, decent people who obviously did not vote for this, who feel that this is Armageddon, that you're the devil incarnate. You've heard all this.
Yeah.
How do you now bring this country together again? How do you unite people? How do you make them think this is not actually something to be terrified of, but to embrace?
Well, we've got to show them that leaving the European Union, all that it's doing is making us a normal country. You know, there are 183 countries out there in the world that have independence days. Today, we became 184th. Normal countries elect their own leaders who make their own laws, have their own courts, control their own borders. That is what normal countries do. And the only reason we've got to this mess is that my parents' generation was sold a lie. They were told it was a common market and it became a political union. And today, that wrong has been righted.
Who do you think should be in number 10 as all of these negotiations now, because we have around, I mean, we have years of disentangling to perform. And as you say, you know, there needs to be a sense of stability and calm. Who is that person? Boris Johnson? Michael Gove?
There are two things we need from the government. One, a Prime Minister committed to making sure that the majority get their will fulfilled. And secondly, a negotiating team of people who've had some experience of business, the real world, or negotiation. Because, you know,
Well, that sounds like you're identifying somebody, but without any background knowledge. Who would people assume that person is?
There are several people, certainly a handful of people within the Conservative Party.
But who would you like to see?
With experience.
You've had enough time to think about this.
I mean,
who do you think would be the most logical person?
What, as Prime Minister?
Yes.
That isn't what really concerns me.
It's what concerns the whole country at the moment.
Well, you know...
I mean, you must be frustrated it's not going to be you.
No, I never wanted to be Prime Minister. I wanted to get Britain out of the European Union. That's why I helped form UKIP. You know, if I want to be Prime Minister, I would not have gone down that route.
OK, but you said, you know, 17 million people have just voted for something that you have promoted. There now has to be somebody as Prime Minister who leads all of that change. Who is it?
That competition could be between Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, Liam Fox, I don't know. But I'm also keen we have a negotiating team that has in it people like John Redwood, people like David Davis, people like Peter Lilly, who've got real experience of being ministers and who've worked in the real world.
David Cameron is sitting there right now, and it's his worst nightmare. He called this referendum, he staked his political career on this, as did George Osborne, and it's come up the wrong way. You think he should go, but some people are saying that maybe he could limp on until Christmas. Is that even remotely feasible? Would it not be better, given the crushing nature of this defeat, for him to come out and say, I'm leaving, and I'm leaving sooner rather than later?
Well, let's be frank. He's ripped his own... I mean, the Conservative Party is literally split down the middle over this. And I know a lot of Conservative MPs that I've spoken to who feel that, frankly, the way he and Osborne have behaved in this campaign has been appalling. They've stretched the truth. Let's be nice. I could use a stronger word. They even used taxpayers' money to put a leaflet through all of our doors. It's not acceptable, I don't think, for Conservative backbenchers for this man to stay on.
Your campaign hasn't exactly been Mother Teresa, has it?
Well,
I mean, let's be honest. When it comes to scaremongering, both sides were pretty terrifying. It looks in the end like the electorate came down on your side, but you can't pretend to be squeaky clean.
All I've ever tried to do is to tell the truth as I see it to the British public and to get us back to being a self-governing nation that controls its borders. Okay. I have been demonised, not just in this campaign, but for the last decade, every single week, because I've dared to talk about immigration. Now, look, I want us to have a sensible, positive immigration policy, but that means immigration running at sensible numbers, not a net third of a million.
Do you feel vindicated?
Do you know something? When you get away from London, when you get away from wealth, when you meet real people, my one enduring image of this campaign was a lady in Bolton who got hold of my hands and said, why doesn't David Cameron come and see what they've done to our community, what they've done to our prospects, what they've done to the chance of our kids ever getting a house. This is the effect that uncontrolled mass immigration has had on ordinary people in Britain. And, OK, I may well have taken some abuse for talking about it, but it was the right thing to do.
Can I ask about money? The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made. Hang
on a moment, that was one of your adverts.
Well, it wasn't one of my adverts, I can assure you.
Well, that was one of the Leave campaign's adverts. That money was going to go to the NHS.
And I think they made a mistake.
That's why many people have voted.
They made a mistake in doing that. But what I can tell you is we have a nice feather bed.
After 17 million people have voted for Leave,
yep.
Based, I don't know how many people voted on the basis of that advert, but that was a huge part of the propaganda. You're now saying that's a mistake?
We have a £10 billion a year, a £34 million a day featherbed that is going to be free money that we can spend on the NHS, on schools, or whatever it is.
But you're not guaranteeing that that money, as promised, will go to the NHS?
You must understand, I was ostracised by the official Leave campaign and as I've always done, did my own thing.
Do you think there are other things that people will wake up this morning and find out aren't going to happen as a result of voting this way?
Well, I tell you what they will find out, that we're back to being a normal country, in charge of our own laws, and able to start making our own relationships with the rest of the world, maybe even re-engaging with the Commonwealth and the real friends we got out there.
Donald Trump's flying into Scotland as we speak. Will you be speaking to the Republican nominee? He's obviously, like you, he's a very populist candidate, non-political type who's fighting hard on immigration and so on. Do you see parallels with his campaign and the one that you fought?
I've been compared to many things over the years, but not Donald Trump as yet. But thank you for that.
Is that a new low for you, Nigel?
It's a bit early of a day for that sort of thing. Look, you know, there is something happening in American politics that perhaps is a bit of a mirror of what's happening here, a feeling in much of America that what happens in Washington is too detached, too remote, and Trump is cashing in on some of it. I don't agree with everything he says, but he must have a chance of winning.
Final message for the people watching this who did not vote for this, who are pretty shocked. I'm reading it on Twitter. Yeah. They're like, what has happened to my country? I can't believe it. They fear that we've now become a kind of semi-racist Little Englander mentality country overnight. What do you say to people that genuinely fear that?
I know a lot of Remain voters did it reluctantly. They did it because they believed the scaremongering and the fear stories about economics. All of that is wrong. And I would say to all of them, listen, guys and girls, we're living in a 21st century global economy. We have just broken free from a backward, failing political union. The world is now our oyster.
When are you having your first pint, Nigel?
Or have you had it?
I've had a couple already.
Well, listen, it would be churlish not to again congratulate you on a successful campaign. We have voted to leave. That's been your big, your dream for many years, as you said. So we congratulate you and the people that worked with you. And John, we're sorry we didn't get more out of you.
We're going to talk to you later.
We're going to talk to you later in the programme and get more about this, because you're right in the middle of the Tory split.
I'm trying to make sure we have a smooth transition and working with parliamentary colleagues on the legislation and on the measures we would need to take. And
should David Cameron
can give you a bit of guidance on.
Well, should David Cameron remain in power to oversee that, or as Nigel Farage just said, is it time for somebody new to come in quite quickly and take things over?
Well, I want to hear what David Cameron says. He's obviously thinking this through at the moment, and I think first of all ask him, because he is our current Prime Minister. He said he's going to leave sometime in this Parliament anyway, so there'll have to be a transition at some point. But what I agree with, which Nigel said, is this has to be a Brexit government now. There's the Conservative mandate for 5 years from 2015, where David Cameron is still its custodian, and the rest of us. And then superimposed is the Brexit mandate from.
So if it's going to be a Brexit leader,
so
who should it be?
There has to be a strong Brexit orientation, and certainly all the negotiations and the Europe-facing areas have to be handled by people who believe in Brexit.
Who should be Prime Minister?
I don't know yet.
Who would you like to see?
Well, I haven't. There isn't a concept.
Come on, you know. You know. You both know who you want. What have you spit it out? Do you want Boris? Do you want Gove? Do you want Theresa May? Do you want me?
Would you like me to tell you what I think?
Well, yes. You didn't decline Piers as quickly as I thought you might.
You haven't ruled me out.
I'm the only person around this table who actually has a vote in this future election.
So who would you like?
There will be an election before the end of the Parliament. It may be sooner, depending on what David Cameron and the party want to do. I don't know. Believe it or not, I can think of a number of people who could do it very well. There's a lot of talent in the party. Obviously, I would want someone who had been in favour of Brexit, because that's the most recent mandate from the British people. And I would want to listen and learn from them when they stood.
John Roberts, thank you very much. Nigel Farage, thank you very much. Going another pint. Big day, obviously, for all Brexiters. Laura has a bird's eye view of London up on the roof with the weather. Is it gloomy over Downing Street? Is there a tempest falling?
Well, weather-wise is all I'm going to be commenting on this morning, and the skies are blue here, barely a cloud in them, but lately we've obviously had the torrential thunderstorms, and it's those storms that have now cleared away from the southeast, and the outlook is looking much drier and brighter across the southeast, but elsewhere there are more heavy showers around. Now, at the moment, the best of the sunshine is through eastern areas, through western areas, the cloud already bubbling up, and with light winds today, the heavy showers that develop through much of Ireland, Western Scotland, Wales and the southwest of England will be slow-moving, tracking their way eastwards, so it could be bad news again for Glastonbury goers with more rain and mud. Find out more about the weather for where you are at itv.com/GMB.
It's an extraordinary morning. Britain has voted to leave the EU after one of the closest fought political battles in history. During a night balanced on a knife edge, the pound has hit a 31-year low as markets reacted to the news.
After a disastrous result for the Remain campaign, David Cameron now faces a very uncertain future. Gargi Patel has more.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Jubilation, chanting and delight as Nigel Farage declared victory in what has been a bruising war over Europe.
82,000.
Early on, there were gasps of surprise in Sunderland, followed by loud cheers as Brexiters scored a 20-point lead. A very different mood at Remain headquarters, realising they'd misjudged the mood of the country. When the polls closed, the markets were confident of a Remain win. The pound surged, but then fell dramatically as a series of early results put the Leave camp ahead.
The implications are very, very major, both economic and political. I mean, economic, we probably will have a bloodbath in the financial markets.
For much of the night, the result was right down to the wire. Just after 3 a.m, votes hovered over the 50-50 mark. But it became clear that Leave's support was much bigger than expected, heading for a historic decision for Britain to leave the EU. Former SNP leader Alex Salmond says it could now trigger a second Scottish referendum for independence.
We've got a united country in Scotland who wants to be part of Europe. And in the manifesto it said if Scotland was dragged out of Europe against the will of the Scottish people, then the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another independence referendum.
David Cameron is now facing his own dilemma. Is he in or out of Downing Street?
My feeling is the Prime Minister could have risen above the fray. He chose not to. I think he probably has to go. I think we have to have a Brexit Prime Minister.
In a bid for unity, almost 90 Tory MPs who supported leaving the EU signed an open letter urging the PM to stay on, whatever the result.
The one thing we do not need to do if we have voted to leave the European Union tonight is for the Prime Minister to go and for us to be plunged into a Conservative leadership contest.
But after months of arguments, now come months, maybe years of negotiations over the country's future. Gargi Patel, Good Morning Britain.
Our Deputy Political Editor Chris Shipp is in Downing Street this morning. Morning to you, Chris. Is the Prime Minister still there?
Well, yes, he's still there. We haven't seen him yet, although we are expecting him in the street at some point this morning, possibly, Susanna, within the next hour or so. But we are now, let's be clear this morning, we are now heading towards a destination that David Cameron asked us, and in fact he pleaded with us not to travel to. We're on our way there. Now, despite that, throughout this campaign he always said he would respect the will of the people, and that is the task before him this morning, to explain here shortly how he's going to navigate his way through this. I mean, the implications are absolutely ginormous. I mean, in the city at the moment, they're giving their reaction to it, and it's not particularly good. George Osborne, the Chancellor, did suggest there might have to be an emergency budget. There's Mr Cameron's own political future at stake here, the future of the United Kingdom as well, given that Scotland voted to remain, England and Wales voted to leave. It is quite a momentous morning. There's no other word for it.
Yeah, and Chris, sorry, did you... I was just having a look at some of the reaction online. Did you mention what time we're going to hear from the Prime Minister this morning?
I mentioned that we will see and hear from him this morning. I don't exactly know when. We think it might be within the next hour, possibly before 7 o'clock. He's got to sort of announce how they're going to stabilise the market. So there's already been organisations like the British Chamber of Commerce who want a swift and immediate response from the Prime Minister. Unambiguous, they said this morning, about how he's going to do this. We don't know, but we think within the next hour, perhaps.
Yeah. All right, Chris, thanks very much indeed.
I mean, so many implications from this. Scotland, do they now push for another referendum on ceding from the United Kingdom? Northern Ireland voted to remain.
Yeah.
You know, where does this leave everybody? I mean, it's a fascinating...
potential constitutional nightmare.
Crisis,
headache,
you might say, yeah.
But an exciting day for all of those who voted to leave the EU. So what does it mean for jobs and the economy? Carolyn Fairbairn is from the CBI, and from Manchester we're joined by Paul Novak, who is from the TUC, both supporters of Remain. So Carolyn kind of effectively representing the bosses. Did your heart sink on this news, or do you feel like, well, it's Independence Day and now we can decide what we do and not get told by the EU?
Well, first of all, good morning. This is clearly a momentous day for the country, and it is a momentous day for British business. This is not what most businesses wanted, and they will be taking time to work through the implications. But the important thing to know about business is that they are used to setback, they're used to uncertainty, and they're used to change, and they will adapt. And right now, up and down the country, there'll be businesses who are thinking, as we speak, about how they adapt to this and make it work as well as possible.
What they'll actually be thinking, sorry to interrupt, but what they'll be thinking is actually what happens now. What is the answer to that question? If you're a businessman in this country or a woman in this country, what does actually happen?
I was just coming to that.
My apologies.
The most important thing to happen now is that the government and the Bank of England work together to bring strong leadership, clarity, reassurance to the markets, so that we can have some stability. And that is the most important thing to happen. And then we can move on to a stage of thinking about what we, the Europe will remain our biggest trading partner. What now needs to happen to secure the benefits through trade going forward?
Paul Novak from the TUC. So that's the view of the bosses, to put it very, very simplistically. You represent the workers. What do you think will be lost in the exit from the EU?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that this is a close vote, but it's a clear vote. It's one that's going to have profound implications for the UK, not just our economy, but the society as a whole. And the first thing that needs to happen is the government needs to take immediate action to support jobs and investment. In the short term, of course, working with the Bank of England to bolster the pound, to bolster the market. But crucially, actually, we need a long-term plan to secure quality employment in this country, and that needs to engage everybody, employers, trade unions, the regions and the nations. We can't allow working people to pay the price for the European exit. So we're on this course to see our way out of the European Union, but crucially we need to put decent jobs, investment at the heart of the debate moving forward.
Paul, I mean, presumably many of your members voted to leave, so there will be a sense of, you know, excitement amongst a lot of people.
Yeah, I think there'll be, you know, many trade union members will have voted to leave, many will have voted to remain, and I think that's one of the things about today's result. I mean, this is a question that has divided the country. It's important now that everybody works together moving forward. Clearly, there is a lot of concern out there amongst our members, amongst working people generally, about the sort of economy and society we've got right now. People feeling left behind, people feeling that we've had an economic recovery, but they've not seen that in their pockets or see it make a positive difference to them, their families, or their communities. People seeing our public services under attack. So a lot of dissatisfaction out there, a divided country. Important now everybody works together as we move forward over the next few months and years.
Right, Paul Novak from the TUC, thanks very much indeed, and Carolyn Fairbairn from the CBI. Thank you both for the view of bosses and trade union members.
Liberal Democrat leader Tim Farron says he's devastated and angry. We wake up to a deeply divided country. Well, that is the challenge now for whoever guides us through the next few weeks and months, is to restore some sanity, some calm, some stability. And actually now we have done this momentous thing, make sure that it works.
Do we stay, though, a united kingdom? Because, as you were just mentioning, Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU. Scotland voted to remain in the EU. Lorraine is in Glasgow for us this morning. Lorraine, you know, some suggestions that Scotland could now call another independence referendum so that they can stay part of the EU, because that's what the popular vote there has chosen.
Well, there's no surprise, is there, that Scotland voted to remain. And this morning I've been talking to lots of people, particularly young people, and they're very concerned, as are business leaders too, that basically England and Wales have declared independence from Europe. I'm joined by David Torrance, political expert. Do you think that another Scottish referendum is inevitable now?
I think it is now much more likely. A few weeks ago, after the Scottish election, it looked to have sort of fallen off the radar. Much more likely, but not any time soon, because there's still hugely complex issues for Nicola Sturgeon to grapple with.
Well, indeed, you wouldn't call a referendum, would you, if you're not going to win?
No. She spoke about material change, but actually the most important material change is not the Brexit vote, it's public opinion and how it responds to the vote. Polls show that support for independence is still roughly where it was 2 years ago, under 50%. It needs to be much higher than that, 60%, before they'll even think of having another referendum.
And there was no real ballot box fatigue, you know. We were a bit worried about that here in Scotland, but the turnout was a very respectable 67%. Now, Bobby and Joseph, you are celebrating this morning, aren't you?
We are indeed, yeah.
Why did you want to leave?
Well, I think common sense kicked in with the British public.
Do you? But not here in Scotland?
Well, I've not heard of reports. What is it? Scotland voted for staying? I've not heard any.
You have heard loads, and you know fine well that you have. You know fine well that you have. Now, I'm going to go over here because I need to talk to Hazy Dugdale, who, of course, is the leader of the Labour Party here in Scotland. Do you think that now it's the end of the UK as we know it?
No, and I don't think we should jump to any conclusions. We've got a saying in Scotland, keep the heat.
Yes.
And that's what we need to do first and foremost, is just calm down. This is a very distressing event for the whole United Kingdom. It's not the result that I wanted. When you look specifically at Scotland, though, 1.6 million people yesterday voted to remain within the European Union, overwhelmingly wanted to remain. But just 18 months ago, 2 million of us wanted to stay within the United Kingdom. So it's not that easy. It's very complex. We all just need to calm down and breathe for a while.
The campaign here was by nowhere near as toxic and divisive as it was in England. Do you think that helped? I mean, the very fact that you all stood together, all the leaders of the main parties, who all incidentally are women, all stood together, do you think that made a difference?
I think it did, yes, and we also resolved ourselves to make a very positive case for why we thought the European Union was a good thing for Scotland, a good thing for the United Kingdom. All three of us, myself, Nicola Sturgeon and Ruth Davidson, went beyond Scotland. We went across the UK to make that case. But even in Scotland, 1 million people voted to leave. There's a lot of people very angry about the world. They don't feel that they have a place in it right now, and they articulated that, they lashed out with that by voting to leave, and there's hard lessons for everyone in that.
No, they're very much so. Thank you very much indeed. I'll hand back to the studio.
Lorraine, thanks very much indeed. 6:49.
Should we just recap?
Yes.
The United Kingdom is leaving the European Union officially. A massive win for the Brexit campaign today means that we are going out on our own, and something that nobody last night predicted. The bookies didn't predict it, the pollsters didn't predict it. Even Nigel Farage said last night he thought Remain were going to win. Well, they haven't. Markets are collapsing, the pound is collapsing. What does it all mean? We're going to try and get answers for you, try and explain what's happened.
Leave have passed the threshold. We expect the official announcement by the official returning officer to happen shortly, and we will bring it to you live.
We've pulled out, and we will get the official statement when it comes, but the truth is they passed that threshold needed to get there. Leave has won. David Cameron, sitting in Downing Street right now, fighting for his political life. Boris Johnson and Michael Gove probably fighting to get to the nearest bottle of champagne. But what does it all mean for you, the viewers, and for your livelihoods and for those of your families? We'll try and explain all that as well as we go forward. But a momentous day for the United Kingdom.
Here's Charlotte with an update on the headlines.
Yeah, just to bring you up to date, there is one big headline this morning. It is a momentous morning. Britain has voted to leave Europe after one of the hardest fought political battles in British history. Well, it was a night that was balanced on a knife edge. The pound hit a 31-year low as markets reacted to the news. Economists have started to downgrade their forecasts for UK growth, with a recession forecast unless a quick deal can be done. After a disastrous result for the Remain campaign, David Cameron now faces an uncertain future, with Nigel Farage leading the calls for him to resign.
Charlotte, thanks very much indeed.
Well, more than 80 Conservative MPs who supported the Leave campaign have written to David Cameron urging him to continue as Prime Minister.
We're joined now by the Conservative MP and Leave campaigner Andrew Bridgen, who didn't sign the letter, and Boris Johnson's dad, Stanley, who campaigned to remain in the EU.
And who just sent Boris a congratulations text. And I just said, as he replied, you check your phone and it said, failed to send.
Well, that's
another failure by the Remain campaign.
Hold on. We fight to win.
We lost. It's over.
We fight on the environment, not, of course, against, the decision of the people. For heaven's sake, this is a moment to rejoice. We had a very good debate, and that's where it is. I don't think we could take a very constructive view. But in that constructive view for me, because I set up this thing called Environmentalists for Europe, well, we need to be jolly sure that in all the work which has to be done in the near future, and you're perfectly right to say about that, we don't lose sight of some of the good things which the EU did.
OK, Stanley, are we talking to the father of the next Prime Minister of the UK?
Who can tell? I mean, that is in the lap of the gods. I mean, all I can say is I won't make another statement, which I did before, saying he's made a career-ending move. I eat my words. You ate your hat once, Piers, as I remember.
Many times I've eaten my hat.
I eat my words.
How do you feel on a personal level, putting aside everything else? You are Boris's father. He did stake his political career on all this. He has triumphs. It's an amazing moment for him. How do you feel about that?
Who dares wins. That's the motto of the SAS. I mean, I think he has actually, and to truth to tell, quite apart from any element of opportunism, if I look objectively at that campaign, and you'll be a part of it, Andrew, they did put on the table, at a crucial moment, some really key issues. Democracy, sovereignty, the direction of travel of the EU, immigration. They put it on the table. And actually, they have benefited from the fact that they raised issues which other people were unwilling to discuss.
And Boris actually came to my seat, North West Leicester. He came to Ashby-de-la-Zouch on eve of poll, and he brought his razzmatazz with him. And I don't know what politically Boris has, but if we could bottle it, I think we could all go to the top.
Do you want him to be Prime Minister?
I have no opinion on whether he should be Prime Minister or
somebody else. Why is everybody saying that when we all know you do? Right, I know that everybody has been thinking about nothing else other than who will be the next Prime Minister.
That's maybe the Remain campaign, the Leave campaign. I've just spent 27 hours awake from eve of poll delivering leaflets, knocking on doors, going to the count and driving down to London. That's not what I've been thinking.
Well, let me ask an impartial observer, Boris Johnson's father.
Yeah.
Should Boris, has he won the right now to be leading this country?
Hey, this is what he has won the right, I would say. I would say he has won the right to have his name enter in the list of the Conservative Party as they prepare their shortlist. I would have said he has at least earned that right.
Having voted against his campaign this time, I assume you voted for Remain.
I did indeed.
And he obviously was the other camp.
Yeah.
Would you personally, if you were able to, vote for him to be Prime Minister? Is he the right man to lead us?
That'll come to me as a member of the Conservative Party only after the first stage.
Right.
Sorry to get technical here, but in the first...
But you will vote for him, I assume?
Well, of course I will. I'd vote for any of my children. You know, I mean, they're all...
Really? Even Rachel?
Oh, God, yeah. They're all...
OK, Andrew Bridger, can I ask you, because we just spoke to Nigel Farage, who told us that pledging as part of the campaign, and it was such a massive headline and such an attention-grabbing pledge, £350 million a week we send to Brussels. We were told, as part of the campaign, that would be spent on the NHS if we no longer sent it to the EU. Nigel Farage told us on this programme within the last couple of minutes it was a mistake to make that pledge.
Well, it needed caveating. I think...
This is... I'm sorry, this is a campaign pledge that people voted on.
Absolutely, and £350 million is the amount of money we do have to owe the EU every week.
How much of that is now going to be spent on the NHS?
I think we've committed to £100 million a week.
You can guarantee, now we are exiting the EU, that £100 million a week extra will be spent on the NHS.
It's going to take some time for us to exit, isn't it? And in the meantime, we're still a full member and we still have to pay our subs every week. This is the beginning of a process. It's not the end of a process.
Okay.
It's going to be a very gradual process.
Nigel Farage said to Susanna this was a big mistake, that the Leave campaign was split and that he didn't agree with it, even though we saw these dramatic
It's actually about £368 million.
Right. But for Nigel Farage now, in the moment of triumph, to basically say one of the great pledges of the Leave campaign, which would be in people's minds when they voted, i.e. we no longer have to drain cash to the EU, now we can give it to help our doctors and nurses save people's lives. Now it turns out to be a load of baloney, apparently.
Well, I think the problem with Nigel, with due respect, is when he talks about, you know, Boris and Michael Gove fighting each other for the champagne bottle. I think probably, you know, Nigel had already hit it. So, I mean, we have to bear that in mind.
So it's a mistake for him to call it a mistake. You still stand by the side of the buses which says £350 million to the EU can
we get some of it back in a rebate, but that's down to the basic charity of our European partners, and they could, you know, dispute that. So it's the amount of money at risk is £350 million. And some of it you get back, but they say it's like, you know, me taking money off you every week and saying, I'm going to buy you a blue dress or paint your house.
I think people are just interested to know what's going to be spent now on the NHS, because it's what they voted for.
Initially, we can't spend any money on the NHS because initially we've still got to keep paying our subs until we fully withdraw from the EU. Well, what we actually will have is you'll have the ability for a government or a party to put forward proposals of how they would spend that money, and the British electorate, as they always can, will be able to decide which party they want to run the country and spend their money with taking back control.
My last word is, let's not fight an old campaign. You know, let's look to the future. We are where we are now. We've got to look at this with a really optimistic view and say, what is the work which needs to be done? Can our diplomats get on with it? And can we do things like I care about, you know, the environment, the nature, and so on? And honestly, I don't see why we can't look forward to some broad uplands.
What a lovely optimistic view.
It is. You always bring a ray of sunshine to
I should have said sunlit uplands.
If only you could have said that during the campaign.
I said it often.
I tell you what, say that about the Johnsons, though. The fact that they all basically backed Remain, apart from Boris, who was running the Leave campaign, that says something about the independent-minded nature of the Johnson family.
Well, I'm talking about sunlight.
Hey, thank you for coming.
Talking about sunlight, are we going to find out what the weather's doing in just a moment? But first, we're going to look at the front pages.
Yeah, let's look at the front pages. They're pretty dramatic. They're all publishing closest call for Britain. Well, that call's now been made. These are the early editions, obviously. They're all... I heard The Sun are doing a 6 a.m. edition, updating, obviously, to the result. So we'll probably try and get... I think what we should do is get the latest ones. There we are. Look, we're out. The Mail. There it is. Very good work by the Daily Mail team, obviously working through the night, as indeed our team has here. There's The Sun. See you later.
They campaigned, of course, for Brexit, so they're feeling triumphant as well this morning.
Called it.
Indeed. Interesting, wasn't it? Because the Sun part of the same stable as the Times backed the Remain campaign.
I can't, but also the Mail on Sunday, Remain, the Daily Mail, Brexit. So this idea that these billionaire owners of our papers control everything, their own editors, completely at odds with each other. I think that's healthy for democracy and also reflects what the country was doing.
Let's talk to another editor, our political editor.
He's still awake. He's force-feeding himself with all sorts of... What are you force-feeding yourself with? Coffee?
Just the excitement of a night to end all night.
Sorry to interrupt, but can we get your attention for a second?
We can. I was just tweeting a Bank of England statement. So the Bank of England has now put out a short statement. They will make a longer verbal statement. I think the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, will make a statement at greater length after the Prime Minister speaks. We're expecting the Prime Minister to speak any time now. So let me just read you the Bank of England statement, which they've just sent to me. So the Bank of England is monitoring developments closely. It has undertaken extensive contingency planning and is working closely with the Treasury, other authorities and overseas central banks. The Bank of England will take all necessary steps to meet its responsibilities for monetary and financial stability. So what does it mean? It means that it recognises that these extraordinary movements in markets, pound falling from was $1.50 only a few hours ago. It's now heading towards 130 below that. Share price is expected to open 8 to 10% lower. It will protect our savings. It will prevent banks from running out of money.
Stay there.
Right.
Do not move. We're about to bring the nation up to date with what's happened, but we need your expert reaction in a few moments, so please stay with us. OK.
It's 7 o'clock. This is Good Morning Britain, EU referendum, the results programme. Today, the United Kingdom has changed its course in history.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Britain has voted to leave the EU after one of the closest fought political battles ever.
Now Tories bid to save Dave. Boris Johnson leads more than 80 pro-Brexit Conservatives, signing a letter to the Prime Minister asking him to remain in office amid growing pressure for him to resign.
Meltdown on the markets. The value of the pound has nosedived to a 31-year low against the dollar amid reports Britain's credit rating could now also be under threat.
And as Scotland and Northern Ireland vote to remain, questions are raised over the future of our union.
Friday, 24th of June, 2016, EU referendum, the result. Live from ITV Studios. This is Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid.
Good morning. Well, an absolutely historic moment for the UK.
What can you say other than, wow, we have left the European Union. Whatever side you were on, this is momentous, historic stuff. Possibly the most important decision we've made in most of our lifetimes.
And it is already having consequences. There were falls in the pound as the markets reacted to the news this morning.
After a disastrous result for the Remain campaign, David Cameron now faces a battle for his survival. Gargi Patel has more.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Jubilation, chanting and delight as Nigel Farage declared victory in what has been a bruising war over Europe.
82,000.
Early on, there were gasps of surprise in Sunderland, followed by loud cheers as Brexiters scored a 20-point lead. A very different mood at Remain headquarters, realising they'd misjudged the mood of the country.
How much responsibility do you take for the result?
And in the last hour, no response from Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn as he left his house. When the polls closed, the markets were confident of a Remain win. The pound surged, but then fell dramatically as a series of early results put the Leave camp ahead.
The implications are very, very major, both economic and political. I mean, economic, we probably will have a bloodbath in the financial markets.
For much of the night, the result was right down to the wire. Just after 3 a.m, votes hovered over the 50-50 mark. But it became clear that Leave's support was much bigger than expected, heading for a historic decision for Britain to leave the EU. Former SNP leader Alex Salmond says it could now trigger a second Scottish referendum for independence.
We've got a united country in Scotland who wants to be part of Europe. And in the manifesto it said if Scotland was dragged out of Europe against the will of the Scottish people, then the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another independence referendum.
David Cameron is now facing his own dilemma. Is he in or out of Downing Street?
My feeling is the Prime Minister could have risen above the fray. He chose not to. I think he probably has to go. I think we have to have a Brexit Prime Minister.
In a bid for unity, almost 90 Tory MPs who supported leaving the EU signed an open letter urging the PM to stay on, whatever the result.
The one thing we do not need to do if we have voted to leave the European Union tonight is for the Prime Minister to go and for us to be plunged into a Conservative leadership contest.
But after months of arguments, now come months, maybe years of negotiations over the country's future. Gargi Patel, Good Morning Britain.
OK, let's go straight now to Westminster and speak to the Foreign Secretary and Remain campaigner Philip Hammond. Welcome to you, Foreign Secretary. Well, a disaster. You've lost. Where does that leave us and where does it leave the Prime Minister?
Well, first of all, speaking as a campaigner, obviously I'm disappointed, but the campaign is now over and I'm here this morning as a government minister. Our job now is to deliver the decision that the British people have made, to negotiate the best possible deal for Britain in the medium term and to stabilise the markets in the short term, to try to make sure that we get the best possible outcome for Britain.
OK, but the instability in the markets has been caused by the fact that your campaign has failed. David Cameron nailed his personal political mast to this and it's come up the wrong way. Surely the decent thing for him to now do, the right thing, would be to fall on his sword and let one of the Brexit campaigners, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, whoever it may be, now take over the reins. Isn't that what they've earned the right to do? Isn't that what the British electorate have now told them they have the right to do?
Well, first of all, the instability in the markets, the short-term instability, is a result of the market having called it wrong. As simple as that. What matters much more is where the markets settle over the next few days and weeks when people have had a chance to consider properly these questions. But look, what the country needs now is stability, not political turmoil. And even the exit campaigners themselves are saying this morning, many of them, that the Prime Minister needs to lead the country, needs to pull the country together, use the power that government has to reunite the country after this campaign. The Prime Minister himself has always been clear that whatever the outcome of this referendum, he would remain Prime Minister, he would remain responsible for the government, and if the instruction of the British people is to leave the European Union, which it clearly is, then the government's task is to negotiate the very best way of achieving that. Make sure that we do it in the way that delivers the best outcome for Britain.
OK, we were told as part of the campaign that if we left the EU, we would be in a more dangerous position in the world. You are the Foreign Secretary. How can you reassure people this morning when that was one of your arguments?
Yes, indeed. I mean, we're not out of the European Union yet, but clearly our position in it, as of this morning, is changed. We can't expect our voice to carry very much weight in the councils of the European Union. And I do believe that Britain will face some significant challenges. We will have to change the way that we do things. We will have to change the pattern of partnerships that we have around the world. But that's my very point. Our job now is to forget the campaign, to sit down and start to think about how we will change the way we work in this country, change the way we manage those relationships, to keep Britain as safe as we possibly can keep it, to make Britain as strong and influential as it possibly can be, and to ensure that any downside to our economy is limited as far as we possibly can limit it.
Secretary, before we leave you, give me one word to describe what this is.
Well, it's a momentous day. It's an extraordinary event, and it will change the course of British history. I have no doubt about that, both in the short term and in the long term. It will have huge consequences for the people of Britain. I think perhaps the second question, which we can't answer this morning, is what consequences it will have for the people of the rest of Europe, because of course we shouldn't assume that everybody in Europe will simply get up this morning and go about their business as usual. I think there will be some very big questions being asked in countries across the European Union, and this is a very clear and strong message to the political class across the European Union as a whole and perhaps beyond Europe.
Well, as I said, that was about 300 words, but I'll take it. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Can I just recap?
Yes.
The Foreign Secretary has just told us today is momentous, extraordinary, with huge consequences, which will change the course of British history. And you don't get many days like that, do you?
You do not. Let's bring in Robert Peston, a man of history. Robert, put this into simple language now. We have now done this. We've pulled the trigger. We've pulled out of the European Union. People will be watching going, OK, now what? What actually happens?
OK, so there are some short-term things which we can say, with certainty. Markets, as I said earlier, are falling, OK? When the price of assets fall, that does have an economic consequence, OK? When investors make losses, many of those investors are us. They're in our pension funds or in our insurance policies, or they could be banks. There is therefore less money to lend and invest. Businesses do engage in less activity, consumers spend less, the economy slows down. I think we can be reasonably confident that the economy will slow down. We don't know how much, we don't know how significant this slowdown will be. That's one thing, right? Secondly, we don't know how easy it will be to negotiate the really important new trade arrangements, not just with the European Union, but also the other 53 trading arrangements with countries outside the EU, which are dependent on our membership of the EU. Now, we don't have all that long to wait to get some sense of how complicated this is going to be, because guess what? There is a European Council next Tuesday when the Prime Minister will be meeting all the other government heads of Europe.
When do we actually leave the European Union now?
We have no idea.
Really?
We seriously have no idea. And I'll tell you why we have no idea. Because we do know that there is under something called Article 50, there is a 2-year negotiating period, which can be extended if countries want to, but the 2-year negotiating period to negotiate the terms of our exit, OK? But that negotiating period only gets triggered when the Prime Minister of this country says, right, the referendum doesn't trigger the 2 years. It only gets triggered when our Prime Minister says to the other Prime Ministers, we now want to start that negotiation. Now, the Leave people say they don't want that triggered immediately. They want a period of, who knows, 6-9 months a year for Parliament to think about what kind of relationship we want with the rest of the European Union. Why do they need that? This is one of the most extraordinary things about this campaign. People have voted to leave not knowing what leave looks like.
Right.
So we've got to have... So they're saying we need another year to work out what it is we sold to the British people. This is an extraordinary moment.
It is absolutely. And there are many, many people, I think... Does this not say about our electorate? There are many people who have felt up to this point that their voices have not been heard. And this morning, 17 million plus people now feel like their voice has been heard. They have been saying for a long time, we're worried about our jobs, we're worried about our homes, we're worried about immigration. And this has been their opportunity to say that.
I think you're absolutely right.
And that's actually a domestic issue.
Well, it's not just a domestic issue because this has huge implications for the rest of the European Union. There are populist politicians in other parts of the European Union arguing exactly the same things as Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. They're all now saying this morning, if Britain has voted out, we want, so Marine Le Pen has already said we want a referendum for France. But you're absolutely right. The thing which should really scare every British politician from a mainstream party is that British people have listened to the arguments of Jeremy Corbyn, they have listened to the arguments of David Cameron, and they have said, we don't care what you say, we don't want you.
Every major party's leader, the Conservatives, the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, as many of them as are left now, all of them campaigned for Remain. They are all out of touch with the mainstream
to them.
Should they all go? All of them?
I think
Corbyn go, Cameron go.
Let's be absolutely clear. So you're going to be talking to a number of senior Tories, and they will all say to you they don't want David Cameron to go.
How many actually mean that?
The answer is they all know that his position is not sustainable because this was the biggest political decision he has ever taken, and he has failed. Now,
Robert, let me ask you.
And actually, if you were him,
isn't it more stable then? And it's a really important point, I think, because they are all going to say this. Isn't it more stable to actually get rid of Cameron, who's lost, bring in a Brexit Prime Minister right away, and then calm everybody down? Why is it more stable to keep the guy that we all know is going to have to leave anyway?
Well, partly because there is so much turmoil at the moment in terms of markets, and you just need a period of stability just to calm things down. But also, it takes a bit of time to organise an election. But if I were David Cameron, and I was sitting in Downing Street, and let's be clear, you know, this is a man who has a ruthless streak. I would be thinking to myself, Michael Gove and Boris Johnson sold this to the British people without actually knowing what they were going to do. I might think to myself, they can have it. They can do the negotiations. They can sort it out.
Yeah.
OK.
Robert, stay with us. Obviously, fantastically insightful there. We're joined now from Westminster by Conservative MP and Leave campaigner Chris Grayling. Welcome to you, Mr Grayling. We spoke to you last week. You were very confident then. Clearly, this country has voted to leave the European Union. Your reaction?
Well, I'm very pleased with the result. I think it's a great day for this country. But I think we now have to enter a period of measured calm. This is not an overnight process. We want to make sure that we leave on the best possible terms for Britain. We've got to work very carefully to make sure we get things right. And I think we now need a period of preparation and debate and discussion before we enter the formal process itself.
You worry as you look at the markets and knowing that the pound is at a historic low. Do you worry about, you know, whatever your political view, the period of financial instability that we appear to be in right now?
Well, I think there was always likely to be an adverse reaction to the market, particularly when the result in the end came as something of surprise. Last night, they were confidently expecting we'd be voting to remain. But I think if we approach this in a measured and calm way, this isn't going to change things overnight. It's a period of a couple of years before we reach the point of leaving. The trading arrangements that were in place yesterday are in place tomorrow. The things you buy in the shops yesterday are the same as the ones you'll be buying tomorrow. And of course, we are their biggest customer. And so my expectation all along has been that we will reach a sensible trading arrangement for the future. The German CBI said so a couple of days ago. That's what they want. And I want us to remain good friends and neighbours, to be an outward-facing nation, to have a global perspective, but not somehow to become hostile to our neighbours. We want to carry on working with them in a whole variety of different forums, like NATO, like the G20. But we've got to now take the decision of the British people and turn it into a practical plan for leaving and a practical negotiation for leaving.
Let me ask you this. Normally, when there's a crushing defeat in an election or vote or poll, especially one of this magnitude, all those who've led the campaign that lose their jobs. Why shouldn't David Cameron, Jeremy Corbyn, others perhaps, now immediately lose their jobs and let those who won take over the running of his country?
Well, I think that there's two big reasons. The first is, of course, David Cameron is the person who gave us the referendum in the first place. And of course, if you offer the country a choice, the country will decide one way or the other. David Cameron's expressed his views, but I see no reason now why he can't carry on and take us through the process of leaving. Indeed, I think he needs to for a number of reasons. One is I do think he's been a very good Prime Minister. The second is that we need a period of stability. The last thing the country needs now is a Conservative leadership contest. And of course, he has personal relationships.
Mr Grayling, with the greatest of respect, and I'm sure you're just being very polite and doing the right thing, but we're going to have Tory after Tory saying all this claptrap when you're all basically behind closed doors in that building behind you, plotting right now to get rid of him. Why doesn't someone just admit that Cameron's toast and then move quickly to a debate about whether it should be Boris or Michael Gove? We all know that's what's going on.
Well, I don't actually accept there's lots of plotting going on in the building behind. I think there is an overwhelming view amongst Conservative members of Parliament that we want him to stay and lead us out of the European Union. The last thing we will need to do, you've just talked about instability in the markets. The last thing the markets want, the last thing our economy wants, is the chaotic 3 months of a Conservative leadership contest. We need a period of calm preparation for leaving. We don't need a change of leadership. We don't need a change of Prime Minister. We need to get on with the job of making sure we leave in the best possible way for the United Kingdom.
OK, do you want to have a little wager with me that Cameron's gone within 2 months?
Well, I don't expect him to be gone. I don't want him to be gone. And I'm going to be arguing to him that he shouldn't go.
You see, I think that is a confusing position for people because, you know, David Cameron's the Prime Minister who called the referendum. That has led to, as we can see, a massive split in the country.
And his party.
He then campaigns for the result that doesn't win. There are all sorts of pledges and promises from those who have now achieved their goal, which the Prime Minister, we know, does not back. There are going to be people on the Leave side saying, how come the guy who's the loser is still in charge at the critical point in history?
Look, for all of us in the last few months have campaigned for something we believe passionately in. I believe Britain will be better off and will be a stronger nation outside the European Union. But I want the process of leaving to be as smooth as possible. I want us to retain good relations with our neighbours. I want it to be economically as beneficial as possible for the nation. What I don't want to do is to create unnecessary extra instability by having a Conservative leadership contest and a new Prime Minister right now. That seems to me just common sense.
Ms. Grading, we have to move now. The Electoral Commission's about to make their official announcement on the result of the referendum in Manchester. Our Ranveer Singh is there live. Ranveer.
Yeah, so it is 7:20, isn't it? And this is the moment, I suppose, the nation has been waiting for. We've already know which way it's going, but we were told a few moments ago that Cornwall, I think, was the last local area to finish counting. We were told, weren't we, that it would be about breakfast time. At least that is right. You can see that the press are assembled there. It's gone very quiet here, actually, because I suppose this is the moment when the Chief Counting Officer comes onto stage and says that this is the final of the 382 areas. I can tell you that there's been quite a lot of reaction here to Nigel Farage's interview on Good Morning Britain when he said that the £350 million wouldn't be guaranteed to go to the NHS. I mean, I think there are probably people who voted perhaps on the basis of hearing that who are now wondering what else may unravel. Everybody here, I mean, there's been, Nigel Evans is here, you know, the sort of MP in Lancashire who voted Leave, looking, I mean, tired but very happy in many ways, and there's lots of different people from different camps. But here we go. Here's the moment.
382 voting areas have now been certified and announced, and I have therefore been able to certify the results of the referendum on the UK's membership of the European Union. As Chief Counting Officer for the referendum on the UK's membership of the European Union, held on the 23rd of June 2016, I hereby give notice that I have certified the following. The total number of ballot papers counted was 33,577,342. The total number of votes cast in favour of Remain was 16,141,241. The total number of votes cast in favour of Leave was 17,410,742. The number of ballot papers rejected. The number of ballot papers rejected was as follows. No official mark, 232. Both answers voted for, 9,084. Writing or mark by which the voter could be identified, 836. Unmarked or void for uncertainty, 15,207. The total number of ballot papers rejected was 25,359. This means that the UK has voted to leave the European Union.
It is 7:22 and the Electoral Commission has confirmed that Britain has voted to leave the EU with 52% of the vote. So the numbers voting to remain in the EU, 16,141,241. The numbers voting to leave the EU, 17,410,742. There is Nigel Farage. We spoke to him a little earlier on the programme. He'd already had a couple of celebratory drinks because, of course...
2 pints, he said, before 6:30 a.m.
I think he said a couple of pints.
I think that's less than normal, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you can't blame him. Look, it's been a thumping win.
He's called it Independence Day for the UK, and we can confirm this morning the UK will be leaving the EU. Well, Robert Peston, our political editor, is here. This is, I mean, as the Foreign Secretary described it, momentous, extraordinary. We are here this morning as the UK completely changes.
No, listen, look, I'm in my mid-50s. This is far and away the biggest political moment of my adult life. I think it's the only event that comes anywhere near. The first time I voted was in 1979. It was the election that Margaret Thatcher won. Now, her victory wasn't such a surprise as this, but what followed completely changed the country. And for those of you of my kind of age, what you'll remember was there was some very painful economic medicine. Quite a lot of people were quite a lot worse off for a period. And then the economy recovered, and many would say it became stronger after a period of some years. And I think it is not completely mad to suggest that something similar might now happen. I think there may be economic costs, and we'll see what then emerges.
Let's hear what Nigel Farage is saying.
Into local schools. This was the issue ultimately that won this election. So I'm thrilled that we've done this. I believe the other big effect of this election is not what's happened in Britain, but what will happen in the rest of Europe. I mean, in the rest of the EU, Eurosceptic parties never talked about leaving the EU, now they are. An opinion poll in the Netherlands said that a majority there now want to leave. So we may well be close, perhaps, to Nexit. And similarly in Denmark, a majority there are in favour of leaving, so we could be quite close to Dexit. And I'm told the same may apply to Sweden and perhaps Austria and perhaps even Italy too. The EU's failing, the EU's dying. I hope we've knocked the first brick out of the wall. I hope this is the first step towards a Europe of sovereign nation states, trading together, neighbours together, friends together, but without flags, anthems, or useless old unelected presidents. So what happens now? What happens next? Well, 17 million people have said we must leave the European Union. We now need a Brexit government. A government that gets on with the job. A government that begins the renegotiation of our trade relationship. A government that'll be mindful that already many of the German car manufacturing unions have said, let's get on and do a deal. Let's go on buying, selling motor cars and wine and cheese with each other. But a government also that at the same time uses the opportunity of Brexit. And the opportunity is we're now freed to start making our own trade deals and associations with the rest of the world. We've left behind, with this result, we've left behind a failing political union. We've given ourselves the chance to rejoin the world in a 21st century global economy. So we need, as I say, a Brexit government. We need the negotiations to start as soon as humanly possible. We need to start thinking globally about our future. And the other thing I think that needs to happen is that June the 23rd needs to become a national bank holiday, and we will call it Independence Day. Thank
you. Well, you got to hand it to him. He's certainly not being remotely triumphalist, is he, Nigel Farage? But who can blame him? He's fought a hard campaign and he's been glorious. Robert Peston, just your reaction to something he told us when he came in earlier, which is now getting a lot of traction in the news, which was his statement that it was a mistake by the Leave campaign to pledge to give the 350 million, this superfluous figure that none of us believed anyway, but assuming that you take their word for what it was, as 350 million, they were going to give that money that we give to the EU to the NHS. Now an immediate backtrack, it appears, by a leading member of that campaign. How significant is that going to be?
Well, you know, one of the things that we've all noticed and I think been a bit concerned about over the last few years is declining trust in politicians. And part of this vote to get out of the EU has been driven by people mistrusting those who run things, whether they're from Brussels or indeed closer to home. And so, you know, actually, I think we've all got to hope that people don't rapidly feel that they've been sold a pup and let down, because what this country can ill afford is yet more anger, accusations, a sense that broadly the democratic system is failing. I mean, what we've got to focus on, one other thing which we've got to focus on today, it seems to me, talked about markets, but let's just focus on those numbers. 16 million people voting for Remain. Now, there's a clear majority in favour of Leave, 17.4 million, well over 1 million additional. But this is a divided nation. Right. And, you know, I mean, we all know around this table, you know, I know families split down the middle on this issue, communities. You know, we've got to find a way, despite this most important vote which has divided us, to somehow come back together.
Well,
this is a huge moment.
I know political parties split down the middle, including the Conservative Party. Graham Brady, MP, Leave campaigner, at odds with your leader, the Prime Minister, who's lost this vote, which he called. You are also chair of the influential 1922 committee. You presumably will have a hand in any process to replace the leader of the Conservative Party. You must feel, you know, like Nigel Farage, thrilled today with the result.
I think the British people have done something very important and very impressive. They have looked ahead and they've made a judgment about the long-term future of our country. They've recognised that we couldn't possibly remain in a political union, which is what the European Union has become. We want a trading relationship. We don't want to be part of the politics of it. The people have voted for that.
Yeah, well, and 17,410,742 people did vote for that.
A lot more would have voted for it if it wasn't for the element of fear that had been introduced throughout the campaign. I think
there was fear on both sides, so we know that.
But the instinct of the people is not to be in a political union with the European Union.
I actually think that the Leave campaign fought a more successful fear campaign. They were slightly more terrifying, which is why they won, probably. Let me ask you this key question. What right does David Cameron have to continue as our Prime Minister, giving this thumping rejection by the electorate? And if he's going to go anyway, as Robert Peston, I think, rightly surmises, then why not sooner rather than later? Why does it make it any more stable to have a lame duck running the country?
Well, David Cameron has every right to stay because he was elected a year ago with a majority in Parliament, and he is in a position to stay and has that right. But it's much more important than that. I think it is the right thing to do. I think it's really crucial that we have the maximum calm, stability, continuity at this point. It's very important that we settle the markets, which are obviously somewhat disturbed by something they weren't expecting. Perhaps they should have expected it, but they didn't. So we need to settle that, and we need to be very clear. This is a big, difficult job, and it's something that is going to take government
but it's also a
long time to do and to get right.
That David Cameron didn't want to do. And it is a big, difficult job disentangling ourselves alongside a lot of promises that the Leave campaign made along the way, which David Cameron doesn't believe in. So it feels like it's a big, difficult job that the wrong man is going to have to do.
David Cameron brought us the referendum, and I think he deserves enormous credit for that. Obviously, we have been on different sides in that argument. But if you think back to David Cameron's position in February, he made it very clear he believes that Britain can and will be a great success outside the European Union. That's something that we now need to see through to a reality. And I think we're going to be setting a very important lead for a lot of other peoples in the European Union who don't want that political union either.
Let me bring back, Robert, you've got a point to make on this.
Well, yes, I mean, just in respect of this issue of how long David Cameron can stay, let us not forget that his closest political ally going back many, many, many years is the Chancellor, George Osborne. Now, in the few days before just a few days before the referendum, the Chancellor said if we vote to leave, he would have to hold an emergency budget.
Yes.
And he said they might well...
Taxes would go up.
Taxes would go up.
They might well go back on manifesto commitments, cut health spending, cut defence spending. Now, it's absolutely clear, we talked to Graham Brady about it, that no Tory MP is remotely prepared to allow George Osborne to have an emergency. So what does the Prime Minister do? Does he now sack the Chancellor and say he's going to stay? I mean, I find that an almost impossible idea.
And also, let's not forget the other key player in all this, Jeremy Corbyn, who many believe has had a disastrous campaign, leading to many more Labour voters heading to leave than they expected. How does he keep his job?
Labour MPs are incandescent today with Jeremy Corbyn, but And the issue there...
Actually, very good point by Susanna. Where are you, Labour MPs? We need to have some of you on this show today. Why should Jeremy Corbyn keep his job when, by common consent on your side and the opposition side, he's been a complete numpty in this campaign? But let's call it for what it is.
But there is, I mean, let's be clear, there are existential, it's an awful cliche these days to use that word, but there are existential threats to both parties. So you've got, a Labour leadership which said that it was standing behind the Remain campaign. Hundreds of thousands of working-class Labour voters went the other way.
Yep, huge.
But you've also got this dilemma for the Labour Party that you've got MPs who think that Corbyn has been a disaster in that sense, but of course the membership, on the whole, are still pro-Corbyn.
OK, Robert, thank you for that. Graham Brady, thank you for that. Let's just recap where we are. 7:34. If you're just waking up, momentous, historic news. The United Kingdom has voted, pretty overwhelmingly, to pull out of the European Union. This will have massive consequences, obviously, for people and for the country. David Cameron in Downing Street right now considering his future. George Osborne, the Chancellor, probably considering his. Jeremy Corbyn, no sign of him. Can't be a good sign. There's no sign of him. Lots of updates to bring you, lots of analysis. We'll keep with us for the next few hours.
Yeah, and just to remind you that the Electoral Commission made the announcement 7:22 today, June the 24th, 2016. Gargi Patel has the story.
The UK has voted to leave the European Union.
After a turbulent night, the official announcement of a major political upset. Earlier...
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day!
Jubilation, chanting and delight as Nigel Farage declared victory in what has been a bruising war over Europe.
82,000.
Early on, there were gasps of surprise in Sunderland, followed by loud cheers as Brexiters scored a 20-point lead. A very different mood at Remain headquarters, realising they'd misjudged the mood of the country.
How much responsibility do you take for the result?
And in the last hour, no response from Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn as he left his house. When the polls closed, the markets were confident of a Remain win. The pound surged, but then fell dramatically as a series of early results put the Leave camp ahead.
The implications are very, very major, both economic and political. I mean, economic, we probably will have a bloodbath in the financial markets.
The shock result has made headline news across the continent. After the win, Nigel Farage told Good Morning Britain he couldn't guarantee one of the Leave campaign's biggest promises.
The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made.
For much of the night, the result was right down to the wire. Just after 3 a.m, votes hovered over the 50-50 mark. But it became clear that Leave's support was much bigger than expected, heading for a historic decision for Britain to leave the EU. Former SNP leader Alex Salmond says it could now trigger a second Scottish referendum for independence.
We've got a united country in Scotland who wants to be part of Europe. And in the manifesto it said if Scotland was dragged out of Europe against the will of the Scottish people, then the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another independence referendum.
David Cameron is now facing his own dilemma. Is he in or out of Downing Street? In a bid for unity, almost 90 Tory MPs who supported leaving the EU signed an open letter urging the PM to stay on, whatever the result.
The one thing we do not need to do if we have voted to leave the European Union tonight is for the Prime Minister to go and for us to be plunged into a Conservative leadership contest.
But after months of arguments, now come months, maybe years of negotiations over the country's future. Gargi Patel, Good Morning Britain.
So, 22 minutes past 7 this morning, June the 24th, 2016, the Electoral Commission confirmed that a majority in the UK had voted to leave the European Union. Nigel Farage said a little bit earlier that he was calling for June the 23rd to now be called Independence Day. He described himself as thrilled and said this was the first step to a Europe of sovereign states. The Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, this morning, who had voted to remain in the EU, said it was a momentous and extraordinary day of huge consequences which would change the course of British history. Now, there are calls this morning for the Prime Minister to stay, even from within people who opposed him within his own party. However, there will be rumblings for him to leave, and we've heard calls for a Brexit government to now take over. But what does this mean now in terms of disentangling ourselves from the multiple arrangements we have with Europe? John Ray is in the EU capital, so to speak, Brussels. John, good morning to you. Well, what happens next and how complicated is it?
It's mind-bogglingly complex. There are 80,000 pages of EU law that have to be waded through for a start-off. What happens next is that we are leaping into the dark. This has never happened before. What is pretty plain here, though, as plain as the day that has dawned here, is that Brussels is waking to its nightmare, that this is not simply a question of the troublesome Brits taking their ball home, that there is a danger of what the Austrian Foreign Minister has already called this morning a domino effect. In other words, other European nations where Eurosceptic opinion is rising steadily, deciding that they need a referendum. So what we're getting from the sort of the mainstream, the leaders here already this morning, is regret for the decision, respect for the decision, but also a pretty clear signal from Martin Schulz, who is the German president of the European Parliament, the building just behind me, that Britain will exit, and Britain must exit soon. They do not want us hanging around like a bad smell, spreading the contagion. This is what Martin Schulz told us just a short while ago.
I'm well prepared for the next steps to protect the European project, to defend the interest of the Eurozone especially. Look to the speculation against the pound today. The lowest rate since '85. I want to protect the euro to face the same problems.
Now, what we're hearing from those parties which we used to call the sort of the far-right fringe, Marine Le Pen, the National Front in France, Geert Wilders of the Freedom Party in Holland, those parties that used to be on the far-right fringe are now sort of centre stage in this debate. Both of those people have welcomed, heralded the British result and saying, look, we want a referendum next. Frankly, an earthquake has happened here. The institutions are still physically standing, but beyond that, the landscape is entirely changed.
Absolutely, John Ray, thank you very much. Could an earthquake happen here in the UK? Lorraine is in Glasgow, in a nation which voted overwhelmingly to remain. Very different to other parts of the UK, Lorraine. So what's the reaction there?
Well, as you know, Scotland was expected to stay, and that's exactly what happened. And I'm joined by Ruth Davidson, of course, as the leader of the Tories here. Do you think, Ruth, that this is the end of the UK?
Well, look, this is a momentous decision. I wasn't able to hear your previous guests speaking in Brussels, but they were clearly talking about the implications this has beyond the UK. And, this was not the result I wanted. I campaigned passionately for the other side. I'm deeply disappointed. But the next steps are where we go from here. But I would say that the 1.6 million votes cast in Scotland last night for Remain don't automatically override the 2 million votes that were cast recently for staying within the UK. It's time for people to take a step back. Plot out the next course, and for our two governments to work together. And I've made it clear to my colleagues in London that the Scottish Government has got to be fully included in everything going forward, as you would expect all the devolved administrations to be. And we've already heard rumblings coming out of Ireland from Sinn Féin too. And we'll watch that going forward. We're expecting the Bank of England Governor to be out soon to calm the markets. The Prime Minister will be speaking within the hour, we expect. And then we're expecting a couple of hours after that the First Minister to speak too. So there's a lot that's going to happen today, but the overriding sense has to be one of calm consideration and where we go from here.
That sounds conciliatory, that does, and that's been the tone of the campaign up here. I mean, all the leaders of all the main parties, you've all stood together. There's been none of the kind of toxic campaigning that we saw in England. And do you think that has gone to help the fact that Scotland did vote to stay?
Well, I think that there was many factors in the reason for Scotland's vote and Northern Ireland's vote and London's vote, if you think about the other parts of the UK too. But we knew that this was the UK as a member state that was discussing this. I'm deeply disappointed that other parts of the UK...
You did put your heart and soul into this campaign. We saw you very passionately debate earlier on this week. You know, you really have been very passionate about it, and as you said, you must be disappointed. So disappointed.
Sure, and the reason is not for myself, but it is for what happens now for the country. It's for people who at home have woken up this morning and are worried about their savings, are worried about the future for their children and grandchildren. But we all of people in leadership positions have to come together, work for the good of our country, make sure that we plot this course. You will have heard from any number of your guests that there is things that have to happen immediately. For example, we need a statement from the Governor of the Bank of England, but there are also some things that will need space and time to happen. And we need people at home to be able to give us that space and time, and politicians need to take that space and time to make sure that when we are working together, we're charting the right course for our country from here on forward.
Do you think it's inevitable that David Cameron has to go? Are you expecting him to say that today?
Well, you've heard, again, people from both sides of this debate, both up here and down south, saying that they want a period of stability. I think that both with the situation of the Prime Minister to stay to give us that stability, but also no rash statements regarding referenda in Northern Ireland, referenda here, which will add extra instability and uncertainty into a situation that requires that level of concern and close working. And I do expect, actually, both the First Minister of Scotland and in the other devolved administrations to work closely with and be included by the UK government in the steps that need to be taken in the coming days.
But not another referendum in Scotland anytime soon?
Well, look, you know my position on this, and I've been on record before the European referendum and after the independence referendum and forward. And like I say, I do not believe that the 1.6 million votes cast for Remain last night in Scotland automatically override the 2 million votes that were cast just 20 months ago to stay as part of the UK. But I do expect, I think the people of Scotland expect, all of the party leaders in Scotland to work together, and we will, and expect the First Minister of Scotland, the Prime Minister in the UK government and the Scottish government to work together, and they will, along with the other devolved administrations of this country.
Ruth Davison, thank you very much indeed, and back to the studio.
Lorraine, thanks very much.
Fascinating stuff there from Ruth Davison. Looking at pictures over the city of London there. An eerie calm descends amid the storm of Britain exiting the EU. We could join now by Scotland's...
It's not calm on the markets, of course.
It's not calm anywhere. Joined by Scotland's former First Minister, Alex Salmond. Alex Salmond, Ruth Davison there trying to sort of suggest there may not be a will to push for a new referendum in Scotland. But frankly, why wouldn't Scotland push for a new referendum, given this cataclysmic change to the nature of UK's involvement in Europe?
Yes, I thought Ruth Davison sounded very uncertain, and so she should be, because, of course, only 2 years ago, she actually told people in Scotland that a yes vote for independence would jeopardise our position within the European Union. Now we've found out, less than 2 years later, that it was actually the no vote that jeopardised our position in the European Union. Now, one thing I'm very sure of, the one politician over the next few days will speak with calm authority and will know exactly where she's going and will provide the leadership that's required will be Nicola Sturgeon.
Let me ask you this. If Scotland was to have another referendum and was to pull out of the United Kingdom, this all feels like Armageddon, you know? We come out of the European Union, Scotland pulls out of the Union, like everything's disintegrating and everyone's splintering into their own little world. Is this really a sensible thing for us to be doing?
Let's look at it from a Scottish point of view. I mean, you know, the access to the 500 million market, because the sensible thing for Scotland to do in these circumstances would never be to leave that European Union. In other words, the decision about Scotland's future would be taken before we were pulled out by whoever is Prime Minister negotiating whatever they're going to negotiate. That would be the sensible thing, and that means for companies, for families, for everyone, there is less risk in Scotland, which is going to, one way or another, secure and defend access to that market than there is elsewhere. Now, I respect entirely the verdict of the people of England, and by 6%, the people of England decided that they wanted to leave the European Union. But the majority for remaining in the European Union through every single local authority area in Scotland was 24%. And that is the mandate that Nicola Sturgeon will take forward.
Yeah, sorry, Alex, I just want to be clear. Do you think that Nicola Sturgeon will push for a second independence referendum for Scotland off the back of this result?
Yes, I do, because I believe she'll implement the manifesto from last month, where she was elected by 47% of the people of Scotland, the biggest mandate of any party elected, but in Western Europe at the present moment. And she'll follow forward on that manifesto, which explicitly dealt with these circumstances as providing the material and significant change which would justify the Scottish Parliament calling another referendum.
Now, my question was, do you think she will? And you answered that very clearly. But you are obviously from the same party and cut from pretty much the same cloth. Do you know that she will?
Well, this is a matter for the First Minister, and she'll be speaking today, and as I say, I think you'll see a clear, decisive leadership tone from Nicola Sturgeon. I think she'll unite as much Scottish opinion as she can behind these actions, and incidentally, we'll see a total realignment. I mean, there was a statement from Diageo, one of our major companies, a great whisky company and spirits company, just a couple of weeks ago, saying, look, if there's going to be a jeopardy of our access to the European marketplace through a Brexit, we'd have to reassess their previous lukewarm, if not opposition, to Scottish independence. So there's going to be a total realignment around this question, because in Scotland, people, companies, workers, families know the importance of staying within that European context.
OK, final question, Alex Salmond. Should David Cameron resign immediately following this loss? Should Jeremy Corbyn consider his position? George Osborne? Which head should be rolling?
Well, you're asking the right person, Piers, because I've got experience of being a First Minister who lost a referendum, and I resigned it the next day, as I had to do, because I'd gone to the people, I'd put my reputation on it, and I was beaten. And therefore, I tendered my resignation so that the country and the party could move on very successfully, as it's turned out. And David Cameron's got no choice. Now, he could hang on for a week or two if Boris Johnson allows him to, but that's no way to go out as a Prime Minister. He's gone to the country, he's staked his reputation, he's lost, he must face his responsibilities, he should resign today, take George Osborne with him, and then the Brexiteers, who unfortunately won this referendum, are going to inherit at least this part of the kingdom, and we'll see what kind of job they make of it.
Thanks very much indeed.
Well, strong stuff there from Alex Salmond. David Cameron should go today. George Osborne today. The Brexiters taking lots of people on social media reflecting that opinion. Don't understand how Cameron can survive, but also lots of people saying, what does it mean for me and my family financially? What about my mortgage, my pension, my work? Where does this leave us?
Is this a time to feel excited, Martin Lewis, because the people have spoken, they've voted for Independence Day, as Nigel Farage describes it, and we are now going to be in charge of our own finances again?
We will be in charge of our own finances, but finances are never truly independent. We live in a global world, and we can see from what's happening to the markets. The stock markets are down across the world on the back of this. And the one thing the markets and finance hate more than anything is uncertainty. And we definitely have a very large period of uncertainty going forward. And it's interesting, you talk about whether the Prime Minister should resign or not. I actually think what we need is a period of certainty. The Prime Minister has an untenable position, but whether he should be going today or not, or whether he should be saying, I will go in a certain period to allow some calm to come back to our country. We are in a very unstable position right now. There are people panicked out there. I've seen it on my Twitter and Facebook this morning about their mortgages and their savings. I just want to address a few questions people have had. One of the big worries is, are my savings safe because of the European £75,000 per person saving safety limit? Well, it is a European rule, but it is a UK financial protection system. So the truth behind that will still be in place. And actually, it dropped from 85 to 75,000, and most people here didn't want that to happen. So we have much stronger systems than we did in the last time there was a big shock back in 2007. The markets work in a different way. The protections are there, and fingers crossed things will go through.
Interest rates?
Well, look. There's two arguments here. When the pound drops, the way you put that back is you increase interest rates because, of course, remember, the pound dropping is an inflationary pressure. It means that imports are likely to be more expensive, and that puts pressure on the pound. But I suspect overriding that is the worry about the economy, that we need stimulus, and you would drop interest rates for that. So I think we could probably see cuts, if anything, coming in interest rates and more quantitative easing. So mortgage rates may get cheaper, more continued bad news for savers. Lots of people asking about house prices. That needs a crystal ball. And certainly, it's not just the markets who are uncertain in a time like this. People become uncertain.
Right, it's uncertain times. George Osborne, of course, the Chancellor, only last week said there'd be an emergency budget if this happened. All our taxes would skyrocket. We'd have financial crises. Well, I don't think he's going to be allowed to do that emergency budget, which makes his position untenable. This could be a day of a lot of dominoes falling, human dominoes. The landscape of our political system
and
changing
possibly
before our eyes.
EU dominoes as well, because as Brexit shockwaves ripple across Europe, Kate Garraway's in Spain, where expats are waking up to the news. What might it mean for them? We'll find out. Good morning, Britain. You're waking up to the news that the UK is going to be leaving the European Union.
Quite extraordinary, momentous, historic day with so many repercussions. We'll try and bring you all the expert analysis that we can. Lord Sugar just tweeting, have you ever made a decision and after it's been set in stone, reflected and thought, why did I do that? Well, watch this space. A lot of people thinking, now we've got what the Brexiters wanted. Do they actually know what they're going to do? Well, we'll find out. Let's go to somebody who's on the other camp. One of the Remain campaigners, Lord Peter Mandelson, is live in Westminster. Lord Mandelson, are you shocked? I went to bed last night and Nigel Farage was saying it looks like Remain's won and the markets were soaring. I wake up this morning at 3:45 and I discovered Nigel Farage is saying we've won, it's Independence Day, and the markets are tanking.
You know, Piers, I have said right from the beginning of this, when we started putting this campaign together last summer, that this was going to be a very, very difficult challenge. You know, there are a lot of people in the country who feel pretty angry about their lot, about the state of the country. They also, in many cases, just feel ignored and overlooked, and therefore they saw this as a very big opportunity to protest. But also, in a sense, what we're all doing is, reaping what we sowed. We have not made a proper case and argument for the European Union and our membership of it for very, very many years. The Conservatives, obviously, in particular, all the time, playing footsie with various degrees of hostility and European scepticism, and then turning round and imploring everyone to vote in favour of it just because there's a referendum now. It was always going to be different. So, whilst I'm very disappointed by the result, I'm not entirely altogether surprised by it. The only thing I would say, if I may, Piers, is that the Stronger In campaign really did a fantastic job, very ably led by Will Straw, who's been on your programme previously. They built from scratch a cross-party across the UK campaign.
Lord Mandelson, with the greatest of respect to you, sir, and we go back a long way, how can it have been a great campaign when you've lost? I mean, it's over.
No, what I'm saying is that the campaign that they put together was very ably done with great professionalism, and they very faithfully implemented the strategy of the campaign once the government took it over following the Prime Minister's negotiation. But the result is the result.
Yes, and what it shows,
I'm
sorry, Lord Mandelson, but what it shows is that the political leaders are completely out of touch with what people are thinking and feeling, despite the fact that the leader of the Labour Party supported remaining in the EU, despite the fact that the Prime Minister and the leader of the Conservative Party supported remaining in the EU. The majority vote is to leave the EU. It says a lot about our political leaders that they're completely out of touch, doesn't it?
It says a lot about our political leaders who, in both the Conservative Party and Labour, are not trusted or do not have the connection that they thought they had with the mass of people in this country. And that was the first point I was making. People do feel angry. They do feel they want to sort of lash out and that they want to protest. And I'm afraid that, just as they feel that, the austerity policies that have been pursued by the Conservative government have not been fair in their impact in the country as a whole, they also feel that the Labour Party leadership
is remote from them, out of step with what they're thinking and saying. And we in the Labour Party have to recognise that and come to terms with it.
OK, one word, Lord Mandelson. Should Jeremy Corbyn stay or go as Labour leader? One word.
I think that Jeremy Corbyn needs to reflect on his role in this referendum campaign. At best muted a lot of the time, at worst simply sending mixed messages. I think there's a question mark about his competence, about his capability, and that's what he and the party need to reflect on today.
OK, we'll take that as a no. Thank you very much indeed. Or a go, I should say. Thank you, Lord Mandelson.
You're watching Good Morning Britain. EU referendum, the result today, the United Kingdom has changed its course in history.
The UK has voted to leave the European Union.
Brexit is a reality as the Leave campaign wins after one of the closest fought political battles we've ever seen.
Now the desperate bid to save Dave. Boris Johnson leads more than 80 pro-Brexit Conservatives, signing a letter to the Prime Minister asking him to remain in office amid growing pressure to resign.
He's gone to the country, staked his reputation, he's lost, he must face his responsibilities, he should resign today, take George Osborne with him.
And there's meltdown on the markets. This morning, the value of the pound has nosedived to a 31-year low against the dollar amid reports Britain's credit rating could now also be under threat.
The EU's failing, the EU's dying. I hope we've knocked the first brick out of the wall.
Vindicated at last, UKIP leader Nigel Farage predicts that Britain will be the first of many nations to leave the Union.
And as Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain, questions are raised over the future of the United Kingdom.
Friday, 24th of June, 2016, EU referendum, the result. Live from ITV Studios, this is Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid.
Well, Nigel Farage is saying it should be renamed Independence Day.
Have a moment to reflect and just say, wow, this country is no longer going to be part of the European Union. This is one of those moments, isn't it? In our lifetime, I can't remember a bigger moment politically ever.
You and I have covered a number of different elections and general elections, but nothing as seismic as our entire country voting to leave a political, economic, social union that we have been part of for so many decades and in which we thought we were inextricably linked. The process now begins to disentangle ourselves from the European Union.
And I think whichever side of it you're on, and the votes were 16.14 million for Remain, 17.4 million to Leave, so pretty close, but a clear majority for Leave. Whichever side you voted, and you have to have respect for everyone who voted, good for you for voting, but we now have to unify and we've got to make it as best we can for the country. That's the challenge for our political leaders, is to now say, right, we are where we are, let's move on.
OK, Britain has voted, as you've heard, to leave the European Union. Let's get the story of what happened with Gargi Patel.
The UK has voted to leave the European Union.
After a turbulent night, the official announcement of a major political upset. Earlier,
let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Jubilation, chanting and delight as Nigel Farage declared victory in what has been a bruising war over Europe.
82,000.
Early on, there were gasps of surprise in Sunderland, followed by loud cheers as Brexiters scored a 20-point lead. A very different mood at Remain headquarters, realising they'd misjudged the mood of the country.
How much responsibility do you take for the result?
And in the last hour, no response from Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn as he left his house. When the polls closed, the markets were confident of a Remain win. The pound surged, but then fell dramatically as a series of early results put the Leave camp ahead.
The implications are very, very major, both economic and political. I mean, economic, we probably will have a bloodbath in the financial markets.
The shock result has made headline news across the continent. After the win, Nigel Farage told Good Morning Britain he couldn't guarantee one of the Leave campaign's biggest promises.
The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, Can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made.
For much of the night, the result was right down to the wire. Just after 3 a.m, votes hovered over the 50-50 mark. But it became clear that Leave's support was much bigger than expected, heading for a historic decision for Britain to leave the EU. Former SNP leader Alex Salmond says it could now trigger a second Scottish referendum for independence.
We've got a united country in Scotland who wants to be part of Europe. And in the manifesto it said if Scotland was dragged out of Europe against the will of the Scottish people, then the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another independence referendum.
David Cameron is now facing his own dilemma. Is he in or out of Downing Street? In a bid for unity, almost 90 Tory MPs who supported leaving the EU signed an open letter urging the PM to stay on, whatever the result.
The last thing the markets want, the last thing our economy wants, is the chaotic 3 months of a Conservative leadership contest.
But after months of arguments, now come months, maybe years of negotiations over the country's future. Gargi Patel, Good Morning Britain.
Chris Shipp, our Deputy Political Editor, is in Downing Street this morning. What's going to happen to the Prime Minister, Chris?
Well, listen, at times like this, you've got to make a call. David Cameron is coming out within the next 10 minutes or so. It's my understanding, and I'm not saying that this is confirmation, but it's my understanding that David Cameron will announce here that he is to resign. Whether or not that is going to happen immediately, I don't know. But I'm told that he will announce he's come to the end of the road as Prime Minister and he's off. I know we've been promising David Cameron for some time now. We thought we'd get him before 7 o'clock. We will be getting him at around about sort of 10 past, 8:15, so, you know, just in 5 or 10 minutes' time. But I'll stick my neck out, and I think he's going to announce, amongst many other things, what are they going to do with the city and whatever else. But I think he's going to announce that he will resign.
Wow, well, dramatic development there. Obviously not massively unexpected, perhaps, but joining us from Westminster is leader of the Labour Party and Remain campaigner Jeremy Corbyn. Mr Corbyn, welcome to you. Obviously a bad night for you and everyone on the Remain side. Your reaction immediately to that breaking news that David Cameron is expected to announce his resignation?
It's obviously extremely dramatic. I hope at the same time as announcing his resignation, if that is what he's intending to do, he will also set out some very urgent proposals concerning stabilising the pound and obviously with that protecting jobs and exports, and that the government will come up with a coherent plan of how it's going to prepare for negotiations to leave the European Union and at the same time protect the working conditions and many other conditions that we have that are enshrined in European law. We're in for a very complicated series of parliamentary votes over the next couple of years.
Jeremy Corbyn, Lord Mandelson was just pretty scathing about your performance in this campaign. He said you'd been pretty mute, pretty lacklustre, that you hadn't really galvanised the Labour vote to vote with you, and in fact many, many more Labour voters voted for Leave than anyone expected. Surely you should be considering now your position and maybe let somebody else take over.
I've no idea where Lord Mandelson gets his analysis or his figures from. The issue is that some areas of the country that are very strong for Labour, such as London and Bristol, voted overwhelmingly to remain. Other places that are also very strong for Labour, such as in the northeast and much of the northwest, voted to leave. The issues now are protection of jobs. The issues are working conditions. The campaign that we ran was one of criticism of the European Union, yes. I argued to remain in it in order to reform it. We're now going to be leaving the European Union. We have some very important issues to face, particularly on export markets for Britain and also of the way in which working conditions are treated in this country.
What are you worried about at this point?
Hello?
Mr Corbyn?
Yes, I missed you for a second. Come back again, please.
Well, I mean, you voted and you campaigned to stay within the EU because you thought that the consequences would not be good if we left. We're leaving. That campaign has failed. What are you worried about this morning? What do you think that the consequences are going to be in real terms?
The consequences have to be dealt with The first one is, of course, export-related jobs and the way in which those jobs can be protected. The other one is the economic consequences of Britain. If there's a fall in the value of the pound, there are other economic consequences that go with that, and possibility of higher rates of unemployment as a result of it. Those have to be dealt with. And if the government is going to bring in a new budget, an austerity budget, we will oppose that, because we believe one of the fundamental problems of Britain are the grotesque levels of inequality, the lack of funding, sufficient funding for local government in the poorest parts of the country. Those issues have to be addressed. There also has to be the introduction, which Gordon Brown had, of a migrant impact fund which helped local authorities in areas that have been most changed because of migration.
Mr. Corbyn, let me ask you this. In terms of the way the campaigns were waged, do you now accept that it was almost parallel lines, that the Remain campaign were fixated about the economy and worrying us and scaring us about what would happen to the economy, whereas the Leave campaign, particularly Nigel Farage, consistently banged the drum of immigration problems, migration problems, and it seems to have been that which has resonated more with the electorate in this particular referendum?
Clearly there was resonance for that in some parts of the country. I think we should also recognise, as I'm sure you do, that the vast majority of European nationals that live and work in Britain claim very little, if nothing, work very hard and pay their taxes, and indeed 50,000 of them work within our National Health Service. There's also, of course, the question of the million British people that live within the European Union, how they feel about their own future.
Do you feel, Mr. Corbyn, that you're in touch with the members of your party who voted to leave the EU?
Our party came to a conclusion at last year's conference of the view it would take on the referendum by a huge majority. The vast majority of unions in this country that are affiliated to the Labour Party came to that same conclusion. We campaigned across the whole country, pointing out that there are inadequacies of the European Union, but that overall we should remain in order to try and reform it and protect those conditions. That decision has been changed now because of the decision of the referendum. We now have to pursue the agenda of protecting jobs and conditions, and also working out an economic future for this country, because our economy has become very dependent on trade with the European Union. There's no guarantee we're going to be in the single market.
Yeah, you are now a leader of a party, just like the Prime Minister, as currently leader of the Conservative Party, who does not represent the will of the people, because a majority have voted to leave the EU. So we ask just finally, are you staying in your position as leader of the Labour Party, or will you, as Lord Mandelson suggests, reflect on that position?
Absolutely, I'm staying in that position. Absolutely, I'll be campaigning for social justice in this country. Absolutely opposing any austerity budget. Absolutely campaigning for decent health services, decent housing and job protection in this country, and a good relationship with Europe in the future, which will ensure we maintain environmental protection conditions, but we also have a reasonable trading relationship with them. It's very important that we protect those jobs in this country.
OK, but if David Cameron is about to resign, as we understand he may be, as Prime Minister, and falling on his sword because he's lost such a major, significant referendum, isn't it also incumbent on you to perhaps reflect on the way you lost your own people, the Labour voters here, and also show some honour and fall on your sword?
Well, we don't know what the analysis of the voting is yet. I pointed out earlier on that areas that are very strong for Labour, such as London and Bristol and many other of the big cities, voted to remain, in some cases by huge majorities. Other areas that are equally strong for Labour voted to leave. So clearly there is a difference of opinion amongst Labour voters. Whether a majority voted to remain or not, I don't think any of us know at this stage. Our job is to bring people together. Our job is to unite people. Our job is to protect those jobs and conditions that are so important.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're getting a podium is coming out, we think, for the Prime Minister to make a statement. We understand that statement may be that he is going to announce his resignation as Prime Minister. Clearly a very dramatic moment. Chris Shipp is there. Chris, we spoke to you a little earlier. You broke the story that your understanding is that David Cameron may be about to resign.
Yes, sorry, Piers. I was just tweeting the fact that the podium is out, as you've just seen yourself, which means David Cameron is imminent. Yes, that is my understanding. I issue it with a huge amount of caution, of course, and you don't do these things lightly, but it's my understanding that David Cameron will announce at that podium there in just a few minutes' time that he is going. Now, whether he goes straight away or not, we simply don't know. Many Conservative MPs were saying that they need a period of stability. You heard that from people like Chris Grayling and others. But is that possible? We simply do not know. And we hear from the man himself, hopefully, in just a few moments' time, Piers.
Well, certainly an incredibly dramatic moment, and this is the potential resignation of the Prime Minister of this country, Jeremy Corbyn there, leader of the opposition, who many think had a pretty poor campaign himself, insisting he's going nowhere. I wonder how confident he will be as the hours and days unfurl here. Huge political fallout here. Huge social fallout, huge financial fallout. Apparently, the FTSE 100 has opened 8-9% down already. So, cataclysmic response from the markets here, the pound collapsing against the dollar.
Meanwhile, we spoke to Alex Salmond from the SNP, saying that he thinks that Nicola Sturgeon could push for another independence referendum for Scotland, because the vote in Scotland was to remain part of the European Union.
And Northern Ireland has voted to remain. And of course, there's a suggestion there may have to be new border control arrangements because of that. So this is massive. I wonder when people voted yesterday, did they understand the real repercussions? Because it is huge.
I think, there's people getting in touch with us all the time saying this is exactly what they voted for. They voted for independence, for sovereignty, for us to make our own way in the world.
To get our country back was the line, wasn't it? Let's go to the city. Our financial reporter, Josie Cox. Josie, stock market just opened and tanked.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really dramatic scenes. I'm here in the centre of the city on a trading floor, and as you can probably see behind me, it's really dramatic. Lots of activity going on. It's certainly nothing like I've ever seen before. I think it's nothing like a lot of the people who have worked way longer in these markets have ever seen before either. The biggest moves we're seeing, obviously, in the sterling market. It's falling very, very, very dramatically against the dollar. It hit its lowest level since about 1985. In stock markets, we're seeing very dramatic moves as well. The FTSE, as you said, opened around 9% lower. It's now around 7 or 8% lower, but that is really unprecedented in the last 30 years. Particularly heavy moves we're seeing in stocks.
OK, we have to leave you there. We're going live to 10 Downing Street. David Cameron, the Prime Minister.
Good morning, everyone. The country has just taken part in a giant democratic exercise, perhaps the biggest in our history. Over 33 million people from England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and Gibraltar have all had their say. We should be proud of the fact that in these islands we trust the people with these big decisions. We not only have a parliamentary democracy, but on questions about the arrangements for how we're governed, there are times when it is right to ask the people themselves, and that is what we have done. The British people have voted to leave the European Union, and their will must be respected. I want to thank everyone who took part in the campaign on my side of the argument, including all those who put aside party differences to speak in what they believed was the national interest. And let me congratulate all those who took part in the Leave campaign for the spirited and passionate case that they made. The will of the British people is an instruction that must be delivered. It was not a decision that was taken lightly, not least because so many things were said by so many different organisations about the significance of this decision. So there can be no doubt about the result. Across the world, people have been watching the choice that Britain has made. I would reassure those markets and investors that Britain's economy is fundamentally strong. And I would also reassure Brits living in European countries and European citizens living here that there will be no immediate changes in your circumstances. There will be no initial change in the way our people can travel, in the way our goods can move, or the way our services can be sold. We must now prepare for a negotiation with the European Union. This will need to involve the full engagement of the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Ireland governments to ensure that the interests of all parts of our United Kingdom are protected and advanced. But above all, this will require strong, determined and committed leadership. I'm very proud and very honoured to have been Prime Minister of this country for 6 years. I believe we've made great steps, with more people in work than ever before in our history, with reforms to welfare and education, increasing people's life chances, building a bigger and stronger society, keeping our promises to the poorest people in the world, and enabling those who love each other to get married whatever their sexuality. But above all, restoring Britain's economic strength. And I'm grateful to everyone who's helped to make that happen. I've also always believed that we have to confront big decisions, not duck them. That is why we delivered the first coalition government in 70 years to bring our economy back from the brink. It's why we delivered a fair, legal and decisive referendum in Scotland. And it's why I made the pledge to renegotiate Britain's position in the European Union and to hold a referendum on our membership, and have carried those things out. I fought this campaign in the only way I know how, which is to say directly and passionately what I think and feel, head, heart and soul. I held nothing back. I was absolutely clear about my belief that Britain is stronger, safer and better off inside the European Union. And I made clear the referendum was about this and this alone, not the future of any single politician, including myself. But the British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination. This is not a decision I've taken lightly, but I do believe it's in the national interest to have a period of stability and then the new leadership required. There is no need for a precise timetable today, but in my view we should aim to have a new Prime Minister in place by the start of the Conservative Party conference in October. Delivering stability will be important, and I will continue in post as Prime Minister with my Cabinet for the next 3 months. The Cabinet will meet on Monday. The Governor of the Bank of England is making a statement about the steps that the Bank and the Treasury are taking to reassure financial markets. We will also continue taking forward the important legislation that we set before Parliament in the Queen's speech. And I've spoken to Her Majesty the Queen this morning to advise her of the steps that I'm taking. A negotiation with the European Union will need to begin under a new Prime Minister. And I think it's right that this new Prime Minister takes the decision about when to trigger Article 50 and start the formal and legal process of leaving the EU. I will attend the European Council next week to explain the decision the British people have taken and my own decision. The British people have made a choice. That not only needs to be respected, but those on the losing side of the argument, myself included, should help to make it work. Britain is a special country. We have so many great advantages. A parliamentary democracy where we resolve great issues about our future through peaceful debate. A great trading nation with our science and arts, our engineering and our creativity respected the world over. And while we are not perfect, I do believe we can be a model of a multiracial, multi-faith democracy where people can come and make a contribution and rise to the very highest that their talent allows. Although leaving Europe was not the path I recommended, I am the first to praise our incredible strengths. I've said before that Britain can survive outside the European Union, and indeed that we could find a way. Now the decision has been made to leave, we need to find the best way. And I will do everything I can to help. I love this country, and I feel honoured to have served it. And I will do everything I can in future to help this great country succeed. Thank you very much.
absolutely extraordinary moment at Downing Street, as in the wake of that result, the majority, 17 million plus people, vote to leave the European Union, and the Prime Minister, David Cameron, announces that he will resign as a result. He said he fought this campaign directly and passionately, held nothing back, based on his belief that Britain is stronger, better and safer in the European Union. But, he said, the British people have decided a different path which requires fresh leadership. So he said that he will stay in post until the beginning of the Conservative conference in October, but that he has already put into place the process required to decide on a new Prime Minister. He said the British people have made a choice that needs to be respected and that needs to work. Our political editor, Robert Peston, is with us. Well, on a historic day, Robert, this is just another shockwave, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, political stories, any story doesn't get much bigger than this. This was a man, David Cameron, who won the general election just over a year ago. He was regarded as a great hero by his party because, frankly, they hadn't really expected to win an outright majority. And now, you know, it's literally barely a year since that perceived triumph. He's off.
Extraordinary times. I mean, is this the start of the domino effect that we discussed earlier, where can George Osborne continue as Chancellor? Surely he has to go.
I do think it's inconceivable that George Osborne can stay very long. Anyway, I mean, it's possible, I suppose, that they could continue both of them in office till the election of a new leader. But there is, as I mentioned earlier, extraordinary anger in the Tory party with George Osborne because, you know, of that emergency budget that he threatened them and the country with only a few days ago. Yeah, go on.
Well, there are two massive political beasts in the jungle who basically decamped from David Cameron, two close friends of David Cameron, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove. They must be sitting there watching this, probably already having spoken to him to orchestrate his departure. One of them will be Prime Minister. One of them might end up being Chancellor as well. They are the future of the Conservative Party with immediate effect, and they're the future of running this country.
Yes, I mean, I'd qualify that slightly. Michael Gove has said, including to me on my show, that he absolutely categorically has no interest in running to succeed David Cameron. He would, you know, it would be a huge volte-face for him to suddenly put himself in the running.
He wouldn't be the first politician to tell a complete porcupine
about that,
he
wouldn't be the first politician.
Is Boris then the man? Is Boris the heir apparent?
So here's the thing, OK? So we've got this fascinating situation that if it was simply up to the Tory members, Boris would be leader tomorrow. But they have this system whereby Tory MPs have to choose two candidates that go then to the members. Now, there are quite a lot of Tory MPs who loathe Boris. And they think he's been grotesquely disloyal, and they believe that actually his position on Europe has been all about his personal ambition and not about the good of the country. So there will be an attempt to stop Boris. I don't think they'll succeed. I think that we'll probably see a Theresa May Boris Johnson contest, from which I would predict that Boris Johnson will emerge victorious.
Last year, David Cameron won a historic result in the general election in which he promised an EU referendum. The irony is he delivered the EU referendum and he has to go as a result. But I wonder whether, because this is such a historic, seismic shift in our political landscape, all of the main political party leaders campaigned on a side which has lost. I wonder whether there might be people out there who voted, or people who voted for the losing side, who now think, isn't this time for a new election where people decide what they want in terms of a government?
Well, here's
because they didn't vote for this. They voted for a party who were promising a referendum, but they didn't vote for this leader, this Prime Minister, and a UK in this position?
All right, so look, you know, after I came off air with you just a few minutes ago, the reason I sort of put out that I thought Cameron was going to go was precisely because this is a catastrophic personal failure of his. That's why he had to go. It's also, some would say, a catastrophic failure of Jeremy Corbyn, because he did say that, you know, his party would be backing this. So there is a big argument for saying, actually, there needs to be change at the top of all parties. There are a lot of Labour MPs who are saying that Corbyn has to go too. Here's the thing, OK? You get a new Tory leader, let's say, Boris Johnson. Now, in normal circumstances, you would, I think, expect that person to seek a mandate by going back to the country. Now, we've got this. One of the things that the last coalition government introduced is these new 5-year terms. It's actually much harder for a Prime Minister to call a general election. You have to get a majority in the House of Commons. So the really interesting question is, let's just say Boris Johnson decided he wanted to have a general election. Would Jeremy Corbyn decide it was in Labour's interest if he's still leader, or whoever is leader?
I don't think Corbyn's...
So this is so...
Corbyn's
this is
not,
what I'm saying is this is really messy territory.
But isn't it also so messy that, I mean, if you're Jeremy Corbyn, really, how can you continue as leader of a party when the leader of the Conservatives, who was side by side with you, has just fallen on his sword?
Okay, I'm going to make one more final point here, because actually here is something which is not, in my view, completely impossible, right? Let's say, you know, Corbyn and Johnson go, and Johnson decides to seek a new mandate, right? Right. We've all had a big shock today. We voted to leave the EU. Markets are falling. We don't know where it's going to go. Economically, it could be quite difficult. Think of a position, which is not completely impossible, where you have Boris Johnson going to the country for a mandate in which he negotiates for us to leave the EU, and a new Labour leader going to the country saying, if you vote us in, we'll go back to the EU and try and tear this whole thing up. And you know, these things are not impossible. These are extraordinary times.
The only certainty is it's going to be incredibly uncertain. Robert Peston, thank you very much indeed.
Robert, thank you very much. Let's go back to Downing Street, where David Cameron made his extraordinary announcement just a couple of minutes ago. I mean, did it feel seismic there, Chris?
Yeah. I mean, I've been here for a few events. I was here when David Cameron announced he was forming a coalition government. I was here when he announced that he'd won the 2015 election. Nothing really prepares you for an announcement like that. As you know, at about 8 o'clock, we announced, and I'm glad it was right, we announced that David Cameron was to resign. And you could sort of almost hear the sort of gasp from all the reporters here. If you look up and down the street, I mean, this isn't just a British story, remember, this is an international story, and there are plenty of international media here. And right at the end of the street there, where you've got the gates which lead on to Whitehall, there is a small crowd there. Some of them are wrapped in Union Jack flags, others are wearing sort of Vote Leave t-shirts, and there was a cheer. You could hear it. David Cameron was making that statement at the podium there, but you could hear a cheer right at the end of the street. I think, you know, losing it in the way that he did, that was inevitable, that statement there. He just had to go, he had no choice.
Chris, he's going to go by October, so who takes over?
Yeah, OK, let's start. Who might take over? Theresa May might take over. Boris Johnson might take over. And then whenever you talk about a Tory leadership, it's never the front runner that makes it past the finishing line. So you've got to look at people who have had a pretty good referendum. And what about Andrea Leadsom, the Vote Leave minister, who was not only on our ITV debate a couple of weeks ago, but she was on the BBC debate this week as well. She's widely seen as having had a very good campaign. Now, I understand that Theresa May is in her constituency. She's got a seat in Berkshire, in Maidenhead. That's where she spent the night. That's where she watched David Cameron make that resignation speech. I suspect there's a few cameras and satellite trucks and things heading to her house right now. I think she'll probably say a word or two this morning, but I mean, this is quite remarkable. A new Prime Minister, a new leader of the Tory party by October. And not only will they have to trigger this Article 50 you've been talking about, which is the exit door from the European Union, and that starts a 2-year clock, but they also have to bring this party back together. Remember, the MPs were split right down the middle. Half of Tory MPs voted to leave and half of Tory MPs voted to stay. Big
Chris
job.
Shipp, thank you very much indeed. Chris Shipp there at number 10 Downing Street, where in the last few minutes we heard the Prime Minister saying it was time to step aside.
The British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. We will also continue taking forward...
So Richard Gaisford is at Buckingham Palace, where David Cameron will go to tender his resignation to the Queen. Richard Gaisford is there for us this morning. What is the process, Richard?
Well, we've heard already that David Cameron said that he has called the Queen to tell her that he will, in 3 months' time, resign, and that over that time they will be looking for another leader in the Conservative Party. We understand the Queen is at home here today. The Royal Standard, as you can see, is flying. On the surface, everything is calm and collected here. The mowing men have been out, keeping everything neat and tidy, but behind the scenes you can imagine an awful lot of running around and head scratching, wondering what happens next. Susanna, it's being described as a potential constitutional crisis, and that is because the people of Scotland, by a majority, have voted to remain in the EU, and we think that is enough for Nicola Sturgeon to perhaps go for another referendum on independence. Certainly that's what Alex Salmond has told us this morning he would like to see happening as part of the negotiations for Britain to exit the EU, for Scotland to also have another referendum. Now, that could leave Scotland independent and a member of the EU, with England and Wales doing their own thing. And I say England and Wales because Northern Ireland has also voted largely, a majority of people, to stay in the EU. That was the Remain vote was larger there. And this morning, Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness has said he thinks now is the time for a vote on a united Ireland. So that is why people are talking about a constitutional crisis. The Queen, in her 90th year, having seen all these celebrations of her 90 years, is now looking at something that is quite dramatic unfolding before her.
Richard Gaisford, yeah, thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to Jonathan Swain now, who's live outside Boris Johnson's house in North London. He's due to come out imminently. Where is Boris? He's taking his time, isn't he?
Well, Piers have been camped outside his house all morning now. Still no sign of Boris Johnson. He does actually have a very shiny black door, not with a number 10 on it, his number 20. But who knows, after what's just happened in the last few minutes or so, that resignation speech effectively from David Cameron, this could well be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Of course, there's a long way to go ahead of that. He has to come outside, give his side of the speech. He, of course, has been perhaps talking to David Cameron this morning as well, and also those inside the Leave campaign, also other members of the Conservative Party. But he really was the figurehead, wasn't he, for the Leave campaign? And did he expect to win? It's been a historic victory for the Leave campaign this morning. The markets, as we've seen, are in turmoil. The pound has fallen. The stock market has dropped by around 9% already this morning. Was this the kind of new dawn, the new era, being outside the EU, that perhaps the leader of the Leave campaign, Boris Johnson, expected? We're expecting him to come outside any moment now. The security and the police, if you can see, are all around his house this morning. We've also got his car, which is about to pull up. There's a bit of movement behind me, and of course there's also the world's media are gathered here as well, not just from the UK, of course, but I say around the world, because the implications of what has happened here in Britain this morning are fairly substantial, to say the least.
Jonathan, thanks very much. We're going to keep a camera on you there outside.
There's 3,000 cameras down there.
Boris Johnson's house. But let's talk to former Cabinet Secretary Lord Gus O'Donnell. Now, you've been involved in negotiating things behind the scenes. We now have to negotiate our way out of the European Union with a Prime Minister who's just announced that he's going to resign, because those negotiations need to take place under fresh leadership. Well, firstly, is that the right decision?
Yes, I think he's absolutely right. I mean, he led the negotiation and the campaign. People have not gone with his chosen decision of Remain. So we need new leadership, which will sort out the negotiating strategy, which we will then take to the European community to try and get the best possible exit for the UK.
How long will it take us?
A long time. There's no question about that, which is why, if I were advising the Prime Minister, I'd be saying don't trigger Article 50, which is the process which starts that 2-year clock ticking. Wait, let's talk to people, let's find a moment to do that and go through that process.
What? If the referendum result is the British people want to leave the EU, presumably they don't want any delay.
Well, I think what the British people want is the people that supported that Leave campaign to sort out the negotiating position, not the people who are running the Remain campaign. So they will want to sort out a new Prime Minister and he will want to sort out his negotiating team so that they can go to Europe and sort out what's best for Britain and which meets all the things they said during the campaign.
OK, let's turn to the Brexiters who have been triumphant here. Boris Johnson expected to come out. He'll have been watching all this unfurl. I suspect he and Michael Gove were talking to their old great friend David Cameron and knew exactly what was about to be announced at Downing Street. What is the likely chain of events in terms of the Tory leadership battle that will now unfurl? And really, is there anything to stop Boris Johnson now, given that he's so clearly been the figurehead for this campaign and is so successful?
It's the standard process of leadership for the Conservative Party. The MPs get together and they will nominate up to 2 people, and I suspect it will be 2. And they will have a vote amongst themselves to get that down to 2, and then that goes to the wider Conservative Party membership, and then they will choose between those 2.
If you were a betting man, what odds would you be giving on Boris right now to be the next Tory leader?
Well, remember, the betting markets haven't exactly been the best guide to what's happened. But I would say Boris must be the favourite by some margin.
Do you think that all of those in the Cabinet and in the government who supported Remain will have to be cleared out for this negotiation to go ahead?
No, I don't think so. I think the new Prime Minister will want to unify his party and will want to bring a number of them together. I think there are certain ones, like the Prime Minister's decided to go. The Chancellor was very, very close to the Prime Minister. It's hard to see the Chancellor carrying on for a very long time, but not everybody will be cleared out. I think it's quite important for the Conservative Party to take account of the fact that this was 52-48 and to try and unify to support a negotiation for the whole country.
We were warned of financial Armageddon. Well, the stock market has crashed this morning off 11.9%. This is the worst. In fact, it's worse than the Black Monday crash of 1987. The pound collapse against the dollar is the worst in 3 decades. We are seeing a form of financial Armageddon. Is this just people running for the hills, terrified by what's happened and it will all calm down? Or is it the start of something very, very serious?
I think this is the reaction you'll get when something happens that's quite unexpected. You know, the markets had, for whatever reason, decided to believe those last opinion polls and had thought this would all be, as it were, fine from their point of view. They wanted Remain. Now it's been something completely different. You'll see this, and in general, financial markets tend to overshoot. So I think we'll see this go a very long way down and then come back a bit.
OK, that's what's happening with the markets and with the negotiations. Lord Gus O'Donnell, thank you very much indeed. What is happening with the UK? Scotland voted to remain within the EU. So do they now have another vote on whether to split with the UK and stay in Europe? Lorraine's going to find out.
Thank you very much. Well, Louise Farquhar, you were undecided, but you eventually decided to vote what?
To remain.
To remain, why?
Well, just because I feel that we're not going to have those equal opportunities. I don't think they're going to protect our rights that we're being part of the EU, and just for my kids' futures, really, just to protect that.
And do you think that there will be another referendum? Do you think it's inevitable?
I think there definitely should be a second referendum, because the vote to leave isn't reflecting what Scotland wants. We've definitely voted that we want to remain. It's been across the board, really, in Scotland.
Thank you. This is an interesting one. Sylvia is from Poland and our family are here. You came here 10 years ago, but in common with 100,000 people from the EU who live in Scotland, this family weren't allowed to vote. You didn't get your say.
No, despite the fact we've been here 10 years, we've been invited. When Poland joined the European Union, Scottish government was inviting young people and young families to come and work and live in Scotland. That's what we did.
And you built up your own business here?
we've been here 10 years, so we feel this is our home. 2 years ago, we started this business with donuts, and we feel really disappointed. All we can do is watch. We are scared what will happen to the prices. Will we be able to provide same value for our customers? You know, all our saving we put into this business, and our future is uncertain. We even don't know if we'll be able to stay in this country.
So you're concerned, and you're really worried, and
especially for our daughter. You know, Scotland is her home. She was only 8 months when we came here. So
are you worried about this, Agatha?
Yes, because like this builds my future, and whatever happens here is depending on where I'll be in the future and what I'll be doing.
So you're very worried about it. And also business leaders are really worried about this as well. And that's the problem. It's all very uncertain. Nobody quite knows what's going to happen. Tom, you've got your own business and you deal a lot with the EU. Are you concerned?
Very concerned. We actually trade in nearly every country in Europe.
Here's Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England.
The people of the United Kingdom have voted to leave the European Union. Inevitably, there'll be a period of uncertainty and adjustment following this result. But as the Prime Minister said just this morning, there'll be no initial change in the way our people can travel, in the way our goods can move, or the way our services can be sold. And it will take some time for the United Kingdom to establish new relationships with Europe and the rest of the world. So some market and economic volatility can be expected as this process unfolds. But we are well prepared for this. Her Majesty's Treasury and the Bank of England have engaged in extensive contingency planning, and the Chancellor and I have remained in close contact, including through the night and this morning. To be clear, the Bank of England will not hesitate to take additional measures as required, as markets adjust, and as the UK economy moves forward. Those economic adjustments will be supported by a resilient UK financial system, one that the Bank of England has consistently strengthened over the course of the last 7 years. The capital requirements of our largest banks are now 10 times higher than before the financial crisis. And the Bank of England has stress-tested those banks against scenarios far more severe than our country currently faces. As a result of these actions, UK banks have raised over £130 billion of new capital and now have more than £600 billion of high-quality liquid assets. So why does this matter? Well, that substantial capital and huge liquidity gives banks the flexibility they need to continue to lend to UK businesses and households, even during challenging times. Moreover, as a backstop, and to support the functioning of markets, the Bank of England stands ready to provide more than £250 billion of additional funds through its normal market operations. The Bank of England is also able to provide substantial liquidity in foreign currency if required. And we expect institutions to draw on this funding if and when appropriate, just as we expect them to draw on their own resources as needed in order to provide credit to support markets and to supply other financial services to the real economy. In the coming weeks, the bank will assess economic conditions and we will consider any additional policy responses. A few months ago, the bank judged that the risks around the referendum were the most significant near-term domestic risks to financial stability. To mitigate them, the bank has put in place extensive contingency plans. And these plans begin with ensuring that the core of our financial system is well capitalized, is liquid, and is strong. This resilience is backed up by the Bank of England's liquidity facilities in sterling and foreign currencies, and all of these resources will support orderly market functioning in the face of any short-term volatility. The bank will continue to consult and cooperate with all relevant domestic and international authorities to ensure that the UK financial system can absorb any stresses and can do its job of concentrating on serving the real economy. That economy will adjust to new trading relationships that will be put in place over time. And it's these public and private decisions which will determine the UK's long-term economic prospects. The best contribution of the Bank of England, the best contribution we can make to this process, is to continue to pursue relentlessly our responsibilities for monetary and financial stability. These are
Well,
unchanged.
that's Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England, describing the preparations that had been made by the bank in the event of this result.
He sounded pretty calm, didn't he?
I
Quite
think
reassuring.
the point
smooth,
is,
calm tones. We need to, I think, just take a pause, keep calm, carry on is very much the British way. And I
that
think
is definitely the tone of voice that Mark Carney was employing, wasn't
Even
it?
though he's an Irish Canadian, of course. But it doesn't matter. But the point being that I think everyone is going to be expecting now a lot of volatility, and the important thing is not to panic.
Yeah,
Let's
I think
just
if we
not-
could make one of those keep calm posters
Keep
for
calm
the
and
markets,
carry on.
it would be keep calm, the banks are well capitalised, liquid and strong.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Lorraine, who's in Glasgow. I wonder whether that sense of calm, Lorraine, doesn't extend as far as Scotland, because this is not the result that the Scottish voters wanted.
No, indeed, absolutely. And we were talking to Ruth Davidson earlier on, leader of the Tory party up here, of course, and she was saying exactly what the Bank of England director was saying. She was saying, keep calm. It was all about keep calm. Are you calm this morning, Tom? Because you've got a business that deals with the EU. Are you feeling calm this morning?
I think we're, I wouldn't say calm, I'm actually troubled with the lack of detail and what this is going to result for our business. We have trading all across Europe and most of the countries there. We're no longer in that arena. We're going to be trading from the outside in, and we'd be concerned about would the applied tariffs or any additional bureaucracy for us to continue to trade the way we're currently doing in Europe. So that would be a concern for us, and there'll be a cost associated to doing that, and it may make us uncompetitive.
Do you think that some businesses might actually start to think the unthinkable almost and relocate?
I think there's a chance of that. It depends how the negotiations go with the government, because we're out of Europe, but we've got to go back to Europe and renegotiate a deal under the European Fair Trade Association. So although we're out, we're still going to trade with Europe and construct a deal that suits the UK businesses and the UK economy as a whole.
Well, this is the thing, Sarah. You're also a businesswoman, very, very successful. But how are you feeling this morning?
Just uncertainty. At SmartPA, we have over 120 franchisees throughout the UK, all female-led, and what matters to them are things like childcare, maternity, the choice to be successful as they want to be, and trade without any barriers. So we're feeling really uncertain and nervous for sure this morning.
And what about the fact that David Cameron will go, not immediately, but he actually will? Do you think that's a good thing?
I think it's a good thing. Get fresh blood in, but still, it just creates more and more uncertainty. So we'll
that fresh blood, of course, might be Boris Johnson. Yeah, I can tell by your face you're maybe not exactly overjoyed about that. Back to the studio.
Lorraine, thank you. Well, as you mentioned, Boris Johnson, we have our cameras trained on the outside of his house, because is he the fresh blood who will replace David Cameron as the Prime Minister? We heard just in the last half an hour, David Cameron, the Prime Minister, outside number 10 Downing Street this morning, saying that it was time for fresh leadership. He said he fought this campaign directly and passionately for the UK to remain in the European Union, and that he said he held nothing back. He believed Britain would be stronger, better and safer in the EU, but he acknowledged the British people have decided on a different path this morning. They have made a choice, he said, that needs to be respected and needs to work. It is, of course, a choice for which Boris Johnson, former Mayor of London, campaigned, in a politically seismic moment within the Conservative Party, when he decided to back the campaign to leave the EU. Lots of people thought that he was gambling with his political future.
His own father said this is the end of his political career when he decided to do this. In fact, it may be just the very start of the next stage of him becoming Prime Minister. So
we are trained on Boris Johnson's house. We are hoping to hear from him within the next couple of minutes. But one of his colleagues, Nadine Dorries, the Conservative MP, also campaigned for a Leave vote, so is feeling pretty pleased this morning. Former Labour advisor and Remain campaigner Aisha Hazarika is also here this morning. So you both sit on completely opposite sides of this vote. I mean, Nadine, firstly, it's a fresh new dawn for you and everybody who campaigned to leave the EU. But we are seeing you know, financial crashes. We've heard Mark Carney, you know, trying to inject a sense of calm. We've seen the Prime Minister resign. It feels like an extraordinary moment. It's been described as Armageddon.
Well, it's also been described as Independence Day.
That's right.
I think it is a new start for Britain. I think the financial markets are already beginning to steady slightly. I think Mark Carney was absolutely right in what he said. You know, we're the second largest economy in Europe. We have good liquidity. We are a strong economy. We can take this. The Bank of England will have contingency plans in place. And so I think people, you know, as we've just said, there needs to be a sigh, calm down. Nothing is different today in terms of the financial markets or what happens within this country than it was yesterday or it will be tomorrow. Any exit will take at least 2 years. Article 50 is not going to be triggered. It's just the same. So everybody really does need to calm down.
Aisha, you feeling calm?
Well, I think everyone is just sort of shocked, really, and sort of rocked by the seismic shift that's happened. I mean, look, it's just been, if you just look back at everything that's happened over the last sort of 8 days in British politics, it really is historic and seismic. Look, on the Remain side of things, we're deeply disappointed, obviously. But this referendum hasn't caused these divisions. It's held a mirror up to what's been happening in Britain, and Britain's a very divided country.
How can Jeremy Corbyn hang on, limp on, when David Cameron, his colleague on this, has fallen on his sword, which is a pretty honourable act, actually, the Prime Minister to go so quickly. Corbyn looks like he's limping on, desperately trying not to lose his seat of power. Is that really sustainable?
Well, look, a lot of the problems with Labour disconnecting from the working classes predated Jeremy, to be fair. But I think he needs to ask himself the question, did he strain every sinew? Did he do everything he can to help get a win for this?
Out of 10, what do you think about his membership of the EU? He said 7.5.
Yeah, and I don't think he did. And also, he has a huge campaign organisation called Momentum. They are on-the-ground activists. Did they swing into action? No, they didn't. So I think there are serious questions to also be asked in the Labour Party.
Can you think of one good reason why Jeremy Corbyn should stay as Labour leader?
Well, it's going to have to be for the PLP and the members to take this forward.
But can you think of one good reason?
Well, I think Jeremy Corbyn has to look very seriously at his role.
Can you think of one good reason? One bad reason? Any reason?
Well, it's not for me to decide.
Nadine, I wonder if I can ask you this morning. There are a lot of people here from the EU. There are a lot of Brits over in European countries. But people who are here from the EU, have they got a reason to worry and fret this morning?
Nobody has a reason to worry about anything. No, we haven't even started renegotiations. So this is going to take a long time.
Are they going to have to go?
No, nobody has to do anything. Nothing is different today than was yesterday.
You are painting a very cosy picture here. The
Of
reality
nothing
is
changing.
we all have to try and stay calm.
Over a period of time.
But we have had the President of the United States saying only a few weeks ago, if we Brexit, Britain will be back of the queue when it comes to a trade deal. That's a pretty big thing to worry about if that is true.
Well, not everybody, not all leaders in America said that. But
He's the president.
But you know, he's the outgoing
He's
president.
the
He won't be the president for much longer. So by the time Brexit arrives, he won't have been the president for 2 years. You know, there was a lot of people were saying, a lot of commentators were saying before this referendum took place, we don't know what the future holds after Brexit. I would say we do. We know that we're in charge, that we will be in control of our own sovereignty. We will be able to... No longer will EU law trump British law, that we will be able to control immigration and our borders.
But on that, on controlling immigration on our borders, the EU immigrants who are here at the moment, if we are now in control of our borders, do we send them back?
No, Boris has made that very clear, and so has Michael Gove, and they've been leading this campaign. There will be nobody will be sent home. The full amnesty will be granted to everybody that's here at the moment.
Do you think many more people now in the next 2 years, do you think there will be a huge influx of people from the European Union, knowing that at some point that border is going to close?
You're asking me to guess, and I'm just not into guessing.
The trouble is we just don't know.
But can I anything? I think this is the worry that people have had. You know, on the Leave side, it was easy to paint a picture that everything was the fault of immigration, and it is easy to say that everything is wrong. The thing that people want to know, what is the plan now? What is the actual plan?
Indeed. All right, Nadine, thank you very much indeed. Aisha, thank you to you as well. It is 9 o'clock. Good morning, Britain. David Cameron has announced he will resign as Prime Minister, triggering a leadership contest. In an emotional speech, he said he fought to remain in the European Union with head, heart and soul. A new Prime Minister will be in place by the autumn.
On a dramatic day, the move comes after Britain voted to leave Europe in one of the closest political contests in history. And in the last few minutes, the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has promised to continue to strive for financial stability for the UK as the markets are reacting with extreme volatility. Well, Gargi Patel now has this report.
A turbulent night that's left a nation divided and just a few moments ago resulted in the Prime Minister's resignation.
The British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction.
The announcement that the Leave campaign had won the day made headline news across the continent, prompting the French government to hold an emergency meeting. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn left his house in sombre mood but told our programme there was still a lot of work ahead.
The campaign that we ran was one of criticism of the European Union, yes. I argued to remain in it in order to reform it. We're now going to be leaving the European Union. We have some very important issues to face.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
After the historic win, Nigel Farage told Good Morning Britain he couldn't guarantee one of the Leave campaign's biggest promises.
The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made.
As early results put the Leave camp ahead, the pound took a dramatic fall. Markets have just opened down 8%.
A few months ago, the bank judged that the risks around the referendum were the most significant near-term domestic risks to financial stability. To mitigate them, the bank has put in place extensive contingency plans. And these plans begin with ensuring that the core of our financial system is well capitalized, is liquid, and is strong.
For much of the night, the result was right down to the wire. Just after 3 a.m, votes hovered over the 50-50 mark. But it became clear that Leave's support was much bigger than expected, heading for a historic decision for Britain to leave the EU. Former SNP leader Alex Salmond says it could now trigger a second Scottish referendum for independence.
We've got a united country in Scotland who wants to be part of Europe. And in the manifesto it said if Scotland was dragged out of Europe against the will of the Scottish people, then the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another independence referendum.
But after months of arguments, now come months, maybe years of negotiations over the country's future. Gargi Patel, Good Morning Britain.
This really is like one of those days, one of those moments in history. We'll look back on this as being, in my lifetime, I'm 51. I've never, ever seen anything as big as this.
It's absolutely, it's historic, it's momentous, extraordinary. We are seeing, played out in front of us, a change in the course of British history and possibly of our own constitution here in the UK. Ian Duncan-Smith resigned from the cabinet earlier this year. A prominent Leave campaigner joins us now. Well, good morning to you. How would you summarise just this moment of history we are seeing this morning?
Well, you're right. This is a huge moment. It's a moment for the United Kingdom, and it's also a moment for the European Union, in a sense. I mean, 24 years ago, I opposed the Maastricht Treaty here in Parliament, almost my first act. And I made the point that the reason I opposed it was because I believed if this and other subsequent treaties went through, it would take away so much of Britain's ability to rule itself that very soon there would come the decision as to whether Britain could stay in the European Union any longer. And I wasn't for leaving at that stage, but that's exactly what happened, went on. More and more power was taken away. And finally, we've had this vote, and the British people have decided that they want to leave the European Union, and it is the job and the responsibility, therefore, of the government to deliver on that. But as you say, it is an enormous decision, but it's a decision, I believe, which, with the risks, but also come great opportunities for Britain to be able to showcase itself, to be able to strike new trade deals, and to be able to ensure that dealing with issues that come down the tracks for British people can be more flexible and lighter on its feet.
Let me ask you this. The pound, I'm reading here, has now fallen so far this morning since this news that the UK is no longer the world's 5th biggest economy. That's quite an achievement by the Leave campaign, if that is correct.
Yes, but of course you're going to see volatility like this in the short term because, you know, hugely the markets had bet massively on there being a vote to remain. You know, so what you saw was the pound rising, what you saw was people transferring money into stocks on the basis that somehow they would get a great deal after the vote took place and be able to take some profit off it. The reality has been they made a major decision and they made a major error, and they've been selling ever since. But the market will stabilise. That is exactly what the Bank of England said.
Hang on. There's no logical reason, really, why, given we're facing several years of massive uncertainty and instability, why those markets should stabilise and why they shouldn't, frankly, carry on tanking. This is the very Armageddon scenario which George Osborne painted for us, happening in real time, and we just have to trust that you guys know what you're doing. Is that trust something we should be giving you?
Yes, this is a democratic choice of British people, and our job now as a government is to ensure that, therefore, with the Governor of the Bank of England, that we remind the markets fundamentally that the structure of the British economy has not changed in any way. He talked about monetary policy being very strong. He talked about employment strategy delivering the greatest number of jobs still in the European Union. And also, you know, we have a whole issue about growth in the UK economy is one of the best, if not the best, within the European Union and in the Western world. So, you know, these fundamentals of the British economy have not changed at all. And, you know, for the moment, we continue to trade and cooperate and go on with the European Union. What is now about to take place is there needs to be discussions very quickly, and then to put in place a twin-track plan. Okay. One is for what domestic legislation needs to be brought through to amend the 72 Act. And the second element is to how that process of discussion with the European Union about what our future relationship looks like will take place. These should not take a huge length of time. In fact, they can be done reasonably quickly, and that is what the government needs to do right now.
We're just about to go over to the city. Just a quick, you know, we've asked people to say just in a couple of words. I mean, just this morning, against that backdrop of the financial markets in that kind of chaos, are you 100% optimistic this morning?
I am indeed, because I believe that this decision, with all risks, come huge opportunities. And the opportunity for the UK now is to tear itself free from what is a terribly, terribly bureaucratic and top-led organisation through bureaucracy, and to become much lighter on its feet to deal with those challenges ahead with a strong economy, which it has, and ability to set those trade deals. In fact, I was in Washington 4 or 5 weeks ago, and all of those senators and congressmen said to me, the moment you take a decision to leave should be the moment we start trade negotiations, and they should end very quickly.
OK, Ian Duncan-Smith, thank you very much. Donald Trump has arrived in Turnberry. I might just ask you, actually, Ian Duncan-Smith, this. Donald Trump has just arrived in Turnberry. What does this victory say for global politics, for the rise of populist non-politicians, if you like, people like Nigel Farage, not conventional politicians, Donald Trump and others? What does it say about an angry electorate simply not prepared to put up with conventional politics anymore?
Well, I think it's very important for politicians like myself to actually listen to the electorate. Democracy demands that you recognise what their concerns are, and what came out during the course of this, debate and eventual vote was that there were many people in the UK that felt that the whole process post the 2008 crash had not been even-handed, in the sense that those who had been responsible had gone on to do well, and many of them in poorer circumstances, had borne that cost. And secondly, they had not been listened to over the issues of the free movement and migration here, which had forced their wages down in many cases. And they thought mainstream politicians weren't listening, but they wanted to be able to take back control of their government, and their government to take control of what is best for the UK. And I think what it says is democracy at the end of the day, whatever you think, whatever the markets like or don't like about it, we have the best system around, and that's called democratic choice, and that is what they have made, and the rest of us' job now is to make sure that we do the best with that. And I believe the opportunities are enormous now, and the market will very quickly begin to price those in.
Yeah, all right, Ian Duncan-Smith, thanks very much indeed. Indeed, the results, 17,410,742 for us to leave the European Union. But our business editor, Joel Hills, who is in the city, has been witnessing this morning the effect of that vote on the markets.
Yeah, and the effect has been incredibly dramatic. But here's the point. It is not catastrophic. What I mean by that is, as Ian Duncan-Smith made the fair point, the markets bet on the outcome of this referendum and they got it wrong. And what we've since seen is wild swings in currency prices, commodity prices, share prices, which have every chance of affecting the real economy. But it's too soon, really, to say with any certainty what will happen next. It is possible, in fact it's probably quite likely, that prices will rise if the pound remains at a sustainably low level and devalued against the dollar. It is possible that we will see a slowdown in growth, indeed probable, but it is not inevitable that Boris Johnson will have to apologise for that recession he says will not happen. It's going to take a few days before we're clear about things. One thing we are clear about, though, is this, and I leave you with it, is that the economic message for months has been made loud and clear from business leaders, from statesmen all over the world, and indeed from our own politicians and economists. There was a consensus. Britain will be worse off if we vote to leave the European Union. Well, that's precisely what Britain has voted to do. Either that message wasn't believed or they didn't care.
Joel Hills, thanks very much indeed. This is the picture outside Boris Johnson's house.
Where is
North
Boris?
London.
Come on, Boris, I know you're watching. Can you please come out? We've got thousands of people there, and there's millions
watching
here, and probably tens of millions around the world wanting to hear your reaction.
And the reason that we are outside Boris Johnson's house is, of course, because the Prime Minister announced his resignation within the past hour. So the suggestion is that Boris Johnson, who made a huge political gamble by coming out for the Leave campaign, is triumphant. This morning, 17 million of us voted to leave against 16 million of us who voted to remain. So is Boris Johnson the next leader of the Conservative Party? Is he going to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? The effects of the referendum, still, we just don't know, and they're being felt not just here in the UK, but obviously over in European Union countries as well. Kate is with some very worried expats on the Costa del Sol. Morning, Kate.
Yes. Good morning. Yes, certainly are. We've been here since the early hours, and as soon as people realised we were British and what we were doing, they were coming out. We might be 1,300 miles away, but they all want to know what's happening back in the UK and saying to me what's going on. And when I told them that we voted out, the colour has been draining from their face, despite David Cameron saying that everything will stay the same for expats at the moment. No one really believes that, because no one believed this would happen. Let me just show you how the English papers are reporting over here. Great Britain destined for an eruption of chaos and disaster. British expats fighting for Spanish passports so they can try and stay in the EU in some way. This is very interesting. These are the Spanish papers. Now, these are the earlier editions, not even on the front page. You had to go to page 40 to find any mention of our vote, and there they focus on vote Remain. Not so now. They've all remade. Britain determines the direction of the European Union is IDL. That's a local Spanish paper. This is a nationwide one. Britain actually making sure there's the headline that the whole of the EU is going to be reconstructed because of our vote. Now, the expats, the locals, and indeed right across Europe, there's a lot of concern. Giles, I know you feel that actually British expats are very scared this morning. You yourself are very angry.
Shocked, stunned, can't believe what happened this morning. Woke up, when I went to bed last night, we were in Europe. I woke up this morning, we're out of Europe. The single Europe that I grew up with has gone. Expats are going to be, they phone into my show, they're going to be angry, concerned, they're worried about their pensions, they're worried about their healthcare, they're worried about their travel arrangements.
Now, the Prime Minister has said, David Cameron has said, the Prime Minister for the moment, that actually we're going to be OK. You will be OK for the moment, but I guess you're worried that that might not be the case. Over here is Cara. She runs a business here. You run the Boardwalk restaurant. You think the Spanish are going to react very angrily because they can't quite believe or even considering leaving the EU, let alone doing it.
Yeah, no, the customers here have been very angry and actually viewing us as very arrogant for even contemplating it. I don't think it's going to do very much for Spanish-English relations. And, of course, there's always Gibraltar to think of as well, which I'm sure there's going to be a lot of problems with.
Yes, exactly. We actually had to fly into Gibraltar because of the storms in the UK, and the whole plane was full of people rushing back there to vote Remain. They did, but of course not nationwide across the UK. Giles is expecting the birth of his first child. Jamie is expecting the birth of his first child. He's got his own dramas going on. Yeah. But you think it's going to be bad for the some 16 million British tourists, don't you, that come here?
Yeah, I'm just worried because it affects my industry out here, hospitality. People use this as it's not far away to come. how it affects when you leave the EU. Is it easy to come in? And people working here as well, are you going to need visas? Each year, obviously, in the summer season, we get a lot of new staff, and it's hard work as it is to just
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Now, Mark actually is a supporter of Leave, even though he lives here.
Yeah. OK, we're looking... just going to jump in there, Kate, because we're looking at live pictures of Donald Trump, the Republican nominee for the US presidency, arriving in Turnberry at his golf course. Well, of course, he and Vladimir Putin were the only two world leaders who openly called for Brexit. So he actually, in our interview on Good Morning Britain, explained why he believes it would be the right thing for Britain to do. So it'll be very interesting. He's got a press conference at 11 a.m, I believe, in which obviously he'll be asked about his reaction to this, but he will be happy about this. He believed it was the right thing for us to do. But there's Ivanka Trump, his daughter, looking very glamorous. Eric Trump, his son. So the whole Trump clan have come into town in Scotland to be met by bagpipes.
Yeah.
God, it's all happening today, isn't it?
Interesting that Scotland, of course, voted to remain.
It's very historic, and we're very happy.
People's anger.
Yeah, people are angry. All over the world, they're angry. And
why? Do you take heart from that? Why are they angry, sir?
I think we're doing very well in the United States also, and essentially the same thing is happening in the United States.
So we now have a divided country. How do we heal that?
I'm really happy to be here. Really happy.
How can we heal a divided country?
I want to support my son, who really represented me here in building this great place. This is a very historic place.
So why are people so angry around the world, sir?
Well, there's Donald Trump, who's, of course, the Republican nominee to be President of the United States, you know, saying he's very happy about this, and also repeating what we discussed earlier, that, of course, a lot of anger amongst the people in this country may well have driven this vote, this decision to leave the EU. A lot of anger in America, which may explain partly why Donald Trump has been so successful so far. What does this mean for the American election in November? It could mean a lot. You know, this could be the start of the rise of populism on the right. Non-politicians like Nigel Farage, Donald Trump, not normal politicians who don't behave or speak in a conventional way.
But seem to be speaking the language of a group of people who have voted to leave
the large group of
EU,
people.
the majority.
Yeah.
In a way that the Prime Minister and the leader of the Labour Party have obviously not been speaking. Katie Rickett is in Ramsgate with supporters of both the Leave and Remain campaign. Morning to you, Katie.
Good morning. Well, yes, France is just over 30 miles across the Channel, and yet Thanet voted overwhelmingly out of the European Union. It's caused shock and disappointment amongst the Remain camp, and of course it's caused elation and the cracking open of champagne amongst the Leave voters. But this really has been, like anywhere, a place divided, even divided among families. Now, we're here with the Warrilow family. Vanessa and Andrew, you weren't even sure how you were going to vote until the other day. How did you decide to vote and why?
I actually voted to leave in the end, but I've been undecided the whole time. I just went with my heart and just felt I should vote, and that's the way I decided in the end.
Andrew, what about yourself?
I struggled with the actual decision, really, but I voted to remain in, specifically around the employment opportunities and also free travel throughout Europe as well. So that's one of the reasons I actually voted to.
Now, if we get the rest of your family to stand up, you will see they are from opposing camps. We've got Pat and Tony here, who voted to leave, and if you just spin over, we've got Will, first-time voter, who voted to remain. I'm going to speak to Pat and Tony first. You switched from 1975, when you voted for us to be in the EU. Why change now, Pat?
Because when we voted in 75, it was just on different terms for trade, and I think we were misled, really. So we've been waiting 20 years, really, to have our say, to get our country back.
William, first time you were able to vote, you must be gutted that you haven't got what you wanted today.
I'm surprised by the result. That's true. I'm not gutted. I had my vote. Everyone else has had their vote, and if the public's decided that they want to leave, then that's the decision. I had my say, and that's the outcome, really.
OK, thank you very much. As William says, everybody got their vote. Nigel Farage, who nearly took the seat here in Ramsgate, has described it as Independence Day, but we're still waiting to see what that independence will really mean for people in Great Britain.
Katie, thank you. Andrew Pearce is here from the Daily Mail, Kevin Maguire from the Mirror. Your papers backed different sides in this campaign, so the Daily Mail Andrew, triumphant this morning.
Delighted.
I just want to clarify one thing. I called Donald Trump a world leader. He's not yet. If you ask him, he thinks he is. Vladimir Putin,
He's waged a successful campaign then, hasn't he?
Well, Vladimir Putin, the only world leader to actually come out and say this. Trump, obviously, is Republican nominee for president, not a world leader yet, but he was the other one. I mean, they were massively in the minority. This was not something that was seen to be cool to back if you were a world leader, or that was likely to happen.
Yeah.
Andrew, how have the Leave campaign pulled this off?
Well, the British people don't like being bullied. They don't like being lectured by the President of the United States, and they didn't believe the sort of stuff that Cameron was saying. They were wheeling out banks and big institutions. And actually, I think a lot of the people who voted to leave thought these are the people who got us in this mess in the first place. And the other big problem was Kevin's mob, the Labour Party, simply didn't get engaged with this early enough. There were 9 million Labour voters. They needed to mobilise to vote to stay in, and he couldn't do it.
We saw a big red bus during the campaign, and on the side of it, it said, we pay £350 million a week to the EU, money we could spend on the NHS. Spoke to Nigel Farage about that this morning. He said that pledge was a mistake.
Was.
It's a pledge on which many, many people will have voted.
Yeah.
It's a lie.
Well, yeah, but what... I mean, I'm not going to defend it, I'm not, but there is no doubt we are still going to be better off in terms of how much money we pay into you. We will be about £10 billion better off. That can be spent on the NHS, that can be spent on reducing our fuel bills. But what I think people voted for was the idea that we run our own affairs
Do you
again.
think that's what it was, Kevin?
No, I think they won on a lie, on deceit, on misleading...
Bad loser, Kevin.
Misleading people, promising the moon. When you don't get all that money for the NHS, when you don't get that high pay rise you're expecting, when your health service isn't better, when your schools aren't better, when your housing's not better, people will turn.
Hang on.
People will turn against them.
Kevin, no, the reality is there were lies on both sides of this. There was scaremongering on both sides. The other side's scaremongering just turned out to be more effective. It became in the end... Well, it became in the end... I would argue, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it became in the end a referendum about immigration.
Yeah, it did.
And yet the Remain camp persisted in the idea this was about the economy. I think that's why they lost.
Piers, every time somebody on the Remain side came out and said all these economists, all these experts are saying if we leave, there'll be big problems in the economy, you would shout Project Fear. Now, there was a fear element in it because you are being warned what you have and you might lose. But the truth is, we're seeing today on Fallout Friday that Project Fear wasn't invented. It was the reality. It was the truth. We're seeing the pound falling. We're seeing the stock market falling. Prices are going to go up in the shops. You might lose your job. You're not going to get that pay rise you thought you would.
Or we might just be seeing the inevitable volatile reaction to an uncertain situation. Last night, if we'd been sitting here, we would all been saying, well, wow, look at that. The markets are soaring, the pound is roaring, and it was the complete opposite. The markets and the bookies and the pollsters have all been made to look very silly over this.
But also, you're right about immigration, and the fact is the Labour leaders have vetoed any reference to immigration in the Labour leaflets. You can't divorce this from why people voted to get out of the common market, the European Union, because they want to stop this free movement of labour, which means potentially 550 million EU citizens can come and live here. People think they're taking jobs and driving down wages.
I don't want to sound like David Brent, but fact, more people come into Britain from outside the European Union than within.
183,000 for EU last year.
When you ask them what they were going to do to stop people coming in, they don't have an answer.
Yes, they do.
They don't have a figure.
Okay, quick question before we... Quick question. We're going to go to Boris Johnson's home in a minute. Who will be the next Prime Minister?
Boris Johnson or Theresa May?
Boris Johnson.
OK, well, let's go to Boris Johnson's house. Our two experts on the other side of the divide, both citing his name there. Kevin with one slight equivocation with Theresa May. Let's go to Jonathan Swain, who's outside Boris Johnson's house. Everyone waiting for Boris. It's going to be quite a moment, isn't it? Because this may well be the man who is our next Prime Minister.
Well, Piers, it certainly feels as if potentially he could well be the next Prime Minister, judging by the security that has just arrived outside his home in the last few minutes. We've got 2 officers here. You can see we have, more than 10 or so officers outside his house this morning. We're waiting for the car to pull up at any moment. A number of people have also turned up outside his home as well. Not everybody here is a Boris supporter, judging by the amount of comments that have been thrown towards his front door within the last few minutes. As I say, the door is a lovely, smooth black door. Potentially he could be leaving this door very soon. Could he be going into number 10 Downing Street as the potential future Prime Minister? And after all, I'd love to ask him whether this is what he really wanted.
Jonathan, thank you. A historic, seismic, momentous day for the UK as it votes to leave.
Good morning.